My husband looked me dead in the eye and casually announced that his former girlfriend was coming to our Christmas dinner. I smiled sweetly and told him that of course she was welcome. But what Darius and his manipulative ex did not know was that I had already invited her secret billionaire fiance to join us. And what happened next completely ruined my husband. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old. I work as a crisis public relations director, managing scandals and controlling narratives for high-profile corporate clients. I graduated from Howard University with honors fought tooth and nail to break through the glass ceilings of corporate America and built a lucrative career. Yet somehow the most dangerous crisis I ever had to manage was the exact one sleeping in my own bed. The morning of Christmas began with a tense silence in our master bedroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken resentment. Darius stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, meticulously adjusting the lapels of his custom Italian wool suit. It was a flawless navy blue masterpiece, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. It cost exactly $2,000. I knew the exact price because my American Express card had absorbed the massive charge just 3 weeks prior. Darius held the title of vice president at a commercial real estate firm, a title he flaunted at every church gathering and fraternity alumni event. He obsessed over projecting the image of a high-value man to our community. He wanted everyone to see him as the ultimate provider, the wealthy patriarch. But behind closed doors, his luxurious lifestyle was entirely subsidized by my relentless hard work. I was standing near the open doorway holding a stack of freshly pressed dress shirts when he delivered the painful blow. He did not even turn to face me. He just met my gaze through the reflection in the mirror. "Chloe is joining us for Christmas dinner today," he said. He spoke with a casual detachment, as if he were simply mentioning a change in the weather forecast. He was inviting his most toxic ex-girlfriend into our home on the most important family holiday of the year. Chloe was a woman who built her entire personality around pretending to be from old money. She constantly bragged about her refined upbringing, looking down on anyone who worked hard for their wealth. For exactly 1 second, my heart stopped beating, my muscles tightened, and the urge to scream burned hot in my throat. But my profession trained me to thrive in total chaos. I did not yell, I did not throw the shirts at his extremely smug face. I took a slow, calculated breath. I let a warm, welcoming smile spread across my face. "Of course," I said softly. "The more the merrier." Darius finally turned away from the mirror, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. He had braced himself for a war. He fully expected the sharp, assertive woman who negotiated million-dollar contracts to tear into him. When I offered nothing but sweet compliance, a wave of arrogant satisfaction washed over him. He chuckled, walking over to me with a swagger that made my stomach turn. He reached out and patted my shoulder, a gesture so patronizing it took every ounce of my willpower not to pull away. "I am glad you are finally being reasonable, Maya," he said. "My mother always said you just needed time to learn how to act like a proper, supportive wife. It is incredibly refreshing to see you put aside your usual aggressive corporate attitude and embrace some real respectability. A high-value man needs real peace at home. You are finally understanding how a woman of our social standing should behave." I kept my smile perfectly pinned in place. "You are absolutely right, Darius," I replied smoothly. "Peace at home is exactly what we need today." He kissed my forehead, completely oblivious to the venom coursing through my veins. He truly believed he had tamed me. He believed his fragile ego had finally conquered my independence. I listened to the sound of his expensive leather shoes clicking down the hallway stairs. The sheer audacity of his speech echoed in the quiet bedroom. He dared to lecture me about respectability politics while actively disrespecting our marriage. He called himself a high-value man while simultaneously relying entirely on my income to maintain his facade. Every single piece of his life was funded by my success. The luxury sedan parked in our heated garage was leased under my name. The country club membership he used to network with potential real estate clients was paid directly from my business account. Yet in front of his church friends and his mother, he played the role of the traditional provider and expected me to shrink myself into a quiet, submissive shadow. Darius and his mother Shirley cared only about optics. Shirley was a prominent figure at our local megachurch, constantly parading her son around as a shining example of Black excellence. She frequently reminded me that a woman's true glory was found in her submission to a strong Black man. But her definition of a strong Black man was completely detached from reality. She ignored the financial stress I carried daily. She ignored the fact that her son's lavish lifestyle was built solely on my stellar credit score. Shirley loved Chloe. She praised Chloe's light skin, her loosely curled hair, and her affected mid-Atlantic accent. Shirley considered Chloe the absolute epitome of class, a proper match for her son, entirely ignoring the reality that Chloe was a superficial grifter who brought absolutely nothing of substance to the table. Chloe was the perfect tool for his fragile ego. She was the woman he dated long before me, a woman who claimed her family owned vast estates in Martha's Vineyard. During social events, Chloe would look at my natural hair and my bold fashion choices with a thinly veiled sneer. She would make backhanded compliments about how brave I was to wear my corporate success, so loudly implying that true wealth whispered while I was practically shouting. Darius never once defended me during those encounters. Instead, he would continuously look at Chloe with an undeniable hunger, captivated by her false elegance. He thought bringing her into my dining room today would put me in my place. He wanted to show me what a real woman of high society looked like, hoping I would feel inferior in my own home. But I did not feel inferior. I felt a cold, dangerous clarity. My years in crisis management taught me that you never react when the scandal breaks. You gather evidence, you control the leaks, and you orchestrate the fallout on your own terms. Darius wanted a display of high society elegance. He wanted to sit at the head of a perfectly set holiday table, surrounded by expensive crystal and fine wine, playing the gracious host to his beautiful former girlfriend. I was going to give him exactly the stage he desperately wanted. I would set the table with our finest china. I would create a flawless setting for his performance. Every public relations disaster has a breaking point, a precise moment when the lies become completely unsustainable and the truth forcefully demands to be seen. Darius was rapidly approaching his breaking point. He stood in my bedroom wearing a beautiful suit I bought, breathing air conditioned by the expensive utility bills I paid, and had the absolute nerve to demand my submission while parading his infidelity right in front of my face. The sheer disrespect was staggering, but it was also liberating. It freed me from any lingering guilt. It severed the invisible chains of loyalty that kept me tied to this parasitic marriage. I did not need to fight for his respect because he possessed nothing worthy of my respect. I walked over to the dresser, my eyes locking onto the empty space where his luxury watch had recently been. The unfair tax weighed heavily on my shoulders, the constant expectation to uplift my husband and his demanding family while sacrificing my own peace. They resented my education from a historically Black university. They preferred Chloe because she played the delicate, refined socialite, even though her entire life was a carefully constructed illusion. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my silk robe. My thumb hovered over my contacts list, resting on a number I had saved under a discreet alias. The trap was already in motion. The guest list for tonight was about to receive a critical expansion. Darius thought he was playing a game of emotional dominance, but he was completely unaware that he had just walked onto a battlefield unarmed. He expected a quiet, compliant wife. He was about to face a woman who dismantled arrogant men for a living. The countdown to Christmas dinner had officially begun. I walked over to the bedroom door and turned the heavy brass lock. The satisfying click echoed in the quiet space, sealing me inside my sanctuary. I moved toward my bedside table, sliding open the bottom drawer to retrieve my personal iPad. This offline device was my vault. I pressed my finger against the biometric scanner, waiting for the screen to illuminate. A single hidden application sat innocuously in the corner, disguised as a generic utility tool. I tapped it, entering a complex 16-character alphanumeric passcode. The encrypted folder opened, displaying months of meticulous investigative work. My crisis management skills had been fully diverted from my corporate clients to my own catastrophic marriage. The screen filled with hundreds of high-resolution screenshots. These were not just flirty messages. They were a devastating chronicle of betrayal. I scrolled through text exchanges between Darius and Chloe, my eyes scanning the sickly sweet declarations of love they shared while I was working late at the agency. Chloe would complain about her supposedly wealthy lifestyle lacking genuine romance, and Darius would respond by promising to treat her like the queen she truly was. The emotional affair was revolting, but the financial betrayal was what truly secured Darius's impending destruction. I tapped a subfolder labeled Financials, exposing the digital footprint of a man who believed he was far smarter than he was. Darius had been systematically siphoning funds from our joint savings account, the account I primarily funded with my annual performance bonuses. He moved the money in careful increments, trying to stay beneath the radar of fraud detection algorithms. Thousands wired directly into offshore accounts linked to Chloe. He was funding her designer wardrobe, her weekend spa retreats, and her illusion of old money elegance using the capital I earned through sweat and sleepless nights. My jaw clenched as I reviewed a transfer receipt from just 3 days ago. $5,000 shifted to Chloe with a memo line reading, "For my true love." Darius was arrogant enough to leave a digital trail, underestimating the woman who audited million-dollar ledgers before breakfast. He took my financial security, the wealth I built to protect our future, and handed it to a woman who openly mocked my existence. I closed the financial folder and took a slow, deep breath, centering myself. The initial sting of betrayal had long passed, replaced entirely by a predatory focus to execute my countermove. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a number saved simply as investor. I pressed the call icon and lifted the phone to my ear, listening to the dial tone ring through the secure line. The man on the other end was not someone you called lightly. Julian was a ruthless venture capitalist, a titan in the financial sector known for dismantling companies and devouring competitors without a second thought. He was also the majority stakeholder who had recently pumped millions of dollars into the commercial real estate firm where Darius was supposedly thriving. More importantly, Julian was Chloe's fiance. She had secured his proposal by playing the refined, innocent socialite, hiding her true grifter nature behind a mask of high society grace. The line connected. A deep, resonant voice answered with crisp impatience. "Speak, Julian, it is." "Maya," I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly level. I did not waste time with holiday greetings or small talk. Men like Julian respected efficiency above all else. There was a brief pause on the line. The venture capitalist shifted gears, instantly recognizing my voice. "Maya. To what do I owe the pleasure of a call on Christmas morning?" I leaned against the heavy oak dresser, staring out the window at the snow-covered driveway. "I am hosting Christmas dinner tonight at my home," I said evenly. "I have a seat reserved for you." Julian let out a low, humorless chuckle. "I appreciate the hospitality, Maya, but I have my own obligations tonight. My fiance is spending the evening with old friends, and I have international markets to monitor." I did not flinch. "Your fiance is spending the evening here, Julian. Chloe is joining my husband and me for dinner." The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear the gears turning in his razor-sharp mind, calculating the implications of his fiancée attending a private holiday dinner at the home of his subordinate without his knowledge. I let the silence hang for exactly 3 seconds before delivering the final strike. "I have some updates regarding your recent investments that you need to see in person?" I continued, my tone dropping to a chilling register. "There are discrepancies in the ledgers that cannot be discussed over the phone. You need to be here at 7 tonight. If you value your capital, you will not miss this dinner." Julian did not ask for clarification. He did not demand evidence over the phone. He was a predator who instantly recognized the scent of blood in the water. "I will be there," he said, his voice now colder than the winter air outside. "Send me the secure gate code." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. The alpha predator had been summoned, and Darius had absolutely no idea that the very man holding his career hostage was about to walk through his front door. Before I could even set the phone down, the device erupted in my hand. A relentless series of violent vibrations buzzed against my palm. The screen lit up with dozens of rapid-fire notifications. It was the family group chat appropriately titled Family First, a deeply ironic name for a group of people who treated me like a disposable ATM. I unlocked the screen and opened the messaging application. The onslaught of demands was already in full swing, spearheaded by my mother-in-law Shirley. She had apparently taken it upon herself to orchestrate the entire evening's logistics, relying entirely on my wallet to execute her grand vision. Maya Shirley's message read, the text aggressively bolded for emphasis. "I just got off the phone with Darius. Since Chloe is gracing us with her presence today, we need to completely elevate the menu. Pastor Thomas is also arriving at 6, and we absolutely cannot serve them cheap home-cooked food. They are accustomed to a certain standard of excellence." I stared at the screen, my eyes narrowing at the sheer audacity. Shirley was not asking for a favor. She was issuing a royal decree. Her next message arrived seconds later. "I have already contacted Elite Catering downtown. They have a holiday rush availability. You need to call them right now and pay the $5,000 invoice out of pocket to secure the service. We must present a sophisticated image tonight. Do not embarrass us with your usual budget-conscious choices." This was the black tax in its purest, most toxic form. The unwritten rule that breaking through economic barriers meant I was permanently obligated to fund his family's extravagant delusions. Shirley wanted to play the wealthy, influential matriarch in front of her beloved Pastor Thomas. She wanted to prove to Chloe that the family had elevated their status, and she expected me to quietly foot the bill for my own humiliation. I watched the typing indicator bubble pop up on the screen. Now Keisha, my husband's perpetually unemployed sister, was joining the fray. Keisha lived entirely beyond her means, constantly demanding I buy her designer bags and luxury shoes, all while gleefully participating in Shirley's subtle campaigns to undermine my marriage. "Make sure you order the good wine too," Keisha typed. "Chloe told me she only drinks imported Bordeaux. She has a very refined palate. She is old money, you know, not like some people who just got their first big corporate check and do not know how to act. Get the bottles that cost at least $300 each. We need to show her we operate on her level." The blatant disrespect was breathtaking. Keisha was using my money to impress the woman actively sleeping with her brother. They were all complicit in this charade. They believed my education at a historically black university and my corporate achievements meant nothing if I could not perform the duties of a submissive, deep-pocketed sponsor for their social climbing endeavors. They wanted me to purchase the very weapons they intended to use against me tonight. I stood centrally, the heavy iPad in one hand and buzzing phone in the other. A lesser woman might have broken down. A woman not trained in crisis management might have sent a furious emotional paragraph detailing their hypocrisy, sparking a messy argument that would only give them ammunition to call her angry and unhinged. But I did not react with emotion. I reacted with surgical precision. I opened the keyboard and typed a single perfectly compliant response. "Understood. I will handle the catering and the wine. Everything will be taken care of exactly as it should be tonight." I hit send and immediately muted the group chat. Let them celebrate their perceived victory. Let Shirley brag to Pastor Thomas about the lavish feast she supposedly orchestrated. Let Keisha dream about sipping expensive Bordeaux with her wealthy idol. They had no idea that I was not ordering catering to please them. I was setting the stage for their absolute destruction. Every dollar they demanded from me today was just another nail in the coffin of their fake respectability. I walked over to my closet, pushing past Darius's designer suits, and pulled out the sharpest, most intimidating crimson dress I owned. Tonight was not just Christmas dinner. Tonight was an execution, and I was going to be dressed appropriately for the occasion. The heavy silk fabric slipped through my fingers, cold and unforgiving. I laid the dress carefully across the foot of the immaculate king-sized bed, smoothing out a single invisible wrinkle. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror one last time. There were no tears in my eyes, no trembling in my hands. There was only the icy resolve of a woman who was about to burn down a kingdom of lies and salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. The game was set. I turned away from the mirror and picked up my phone to silence the remaining notifications. But before I could lock the screen, another message from Keisha flashed across the display. She simply could not help herself. The opportunity to play the role of a wealthy socialite by proxy was too intoxicating for her. "Make sure you get the Chateau Margaux," she typed, followed by a wine glass emoji. "Chloe specifically mentioned it last time we had lunch. She is old money Maya. She has a highly refined palate. Do not serve her that cheap supermarket brand you usually buy. We need to show her we operate on her level. And Maya, please do not bring up your college stories. I know you are proud of Howard University, but Chloe went to Yale. We want to keep the conversation sophisticated. Black excellence is fine, but we do not want to sound ghetto. Let us keep it classy for the pastor." The sheer ignorance of her words was astounding. Keisha, a woman who had never held a job for more than 6 months and currently lived in a townhouse that I paid the deposit for, was lecturing me on class. She was weaponizing my historically black university education as if it were a badge of inferiority, completely buying into the racist and classist narratives that Chloe expertly spun. Chloe, who I already knew was bleeding my husband dry, had somehow convinced my sister-in-law that sipping stolen wine made them upper crust. I did not argue. I did not point out that the Howard Alumni Network practically ran the political and corporate sectors of this city. They expected me to blow up. They wanted me to send a furious emotional paragraph detailing their hypocrisy, sparking a messy argument that would only give them ammunition to call me an angry, unhinged black woman. But I was not playing their game today. I simply typed my response with steady, deliberate keystrokes. Understood. It will be taken care of. I locked the phone and tossed it onto the nightstand. I relied entirely on cold clarity now. Emotion was a liability I could no longer afford. I walked into my home office, a sleek room dominated by a massive glass desk and walls, lined with framed degrees and corporate awards. I sat in my ergonomic chair, booted up my secure desktop, and pulled up the contact profile for Elias. Elias was a private forensic accountant I retained for my most sensitive corporate clients. He was a financial bloodhound, a man who could track a single missing dollar through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. I had quietly put him on a retainer 3 weeks ago when I first noticed the minor discrepancies in my joint savings account. Now I needed him to escalate the timeline. I dialed his direct line. He answered on the second ring. "Maya," he said, his voice gravelly and alert. "I was just compiling the initial data you requested. I need you to fast-track the deep dive, Elias," I told him, bypassing all pleasantries. "I need a comprehensive audit of Darius's recent commercial real estate dealings, specifically anything related to the downtown plaza project he claimed was taking up all his time. I need to know exactly where the capital is flowing, who is authorizing the transfers, and if there are any secondary signatures on our personal assets. I need it in the next 4 hours." There was a heavy pause on the line. The clicking of a keyboard echoed softly in the background. "4 hours is a tight window, Maya. You are asking me to bypass standard protocols and pull favors. I will double your retainer," I replied instantly. "I do not care what doors you have to kick down or what digital locks you have to pick. I need absolute proof of his financial movements. I am hosting a dinner tonight, and the majority stakeholder of his firm is attending. I intend to serve a very specific dish, and I need the receipts to back it up." "Consider it done," Elias said, the professionalism returning to his tone. I will send everything to your encrypted server the moment I have it compiled. I disconnected the call. The silence of the house pressed in on me, heavy with the weight of the impending storm. The tension in my chest was tightening, coiling like a spring ready to snap. I had 4 hours to transform my home into a flawless stage for the evening's execution. I moved through the house with military precision. I called Elite Catering, the overpriced downtown service Shirley had demanded. I ordered their most expensive holiday package, complete with the requested Chateau Margaux roasted duck and truffle mashed potatoes. I paid the exorbitant $5,000 invoice with a separate business account, ensuring the paper trail would be crystal clear when it came time to present the final bill to Shirley. I wanted her to gorge herself on luxury tonight. I wanted her to savor every single bite, completely unaware that it would be the absolute last meal she ever enjoyed on my dime. Next, I tackled the dining room. I pulled out the imported Italian crystal glasses and the silver cutlery I had purchased during our honeymoon in Rome. I arranged the table settings meticulously, measuring the distance between the forks and the edge of the mahogany table. I placed a beautiful towering centerpiece of winter greens and white roses in the middle. The room looked like a spread from a high-end lifestyle magazine. It was the perfect illusion of a happy, wealthy, respectable Black family. It was exactly the facade Darius and Shirley worshipped. As I polished the crystal wine glasses, my mind raced through the sequence of events I had orchestrated. Julian was coming. Pastor Thomas was coming. The entire family would be seated around this table, trapped in the confines of their own vanity. I imagined Chloe walking through my front door draped in designer fabrics, flashing whatever jewelry Darius had foolishly bought her. I imagined the smug look on Shirley's face as she attempted to humiliate me in front of her beloved pastor. I welcomed the thought. Their arrogance was my greatest weapon. The more secure they felt in their superiority, the more devastating their eventual fall would be. I checked my watch. 3 hours left. I moved to the living room, adjusting the lighting to create a warm, inviting glow. I lit cedar and vanilla-scented candles, masking the sterile scent of the cleaning supplies I had used earlier. I wanted the house to feel perfect. I wanted it to feel like a home they would desperately mourn losing. I arranged the seating chart with deliberate cruelty. I placed Julian directly across from the seats reserved for Darius and Chloe, ensuring they would have to stare into the eyes of the man they were betraying all night long. Shirley would sit next to Pastor Thomas, perfectly positioned to witness the collapse of her son's false empire. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I walked over, my pulse quickening slightly. It was a secure message from Elias. The preliminary findings were ready. I opened the encrypted link, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted financial documents. What I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. Darius had not just been siphoning money from our joint savings. He had been executing moves so reckless, so profoundly stupid, that I almost laughed out loud at his audacity. The ledger showed unauthorized access to the equity of our home. My home. The property I had purchased before we even married, the one I had allowed him to add his name to out of a misguided sense of marital unity. Elias had highlighted a specific set of wire transfers. Darius had recently liquidated a massive portion of his firm's capital, masking it as operational expenses for a phantom contracting company, the firm that Julian owned. Darius was stealing from a billionaire venture capitalist to maintain the illusion of being a high-value provider for a woman who was equally fraudulent. It was a house of cards built on gasoline, and I was holding the match. I scrolled further down the document. There was a recent purchase order from a high-end jeweler downtown, $150,000 for a custom-cut diamond ring. Darius had mortgaged our future to buy Chloe an engagement ring so she could parade it around town and claim Julian bought it for her. Chloe was using Darius to fund the lifestyle Julian was too smart to just hand over, and Darius was using Julian's money to do it. The sheer circular stupidity of their affair was staggering. I went to my desk. I printed the damaging documents, placing them into red envelopes. They looked like festive holiday cards. I was ready. My secure phone buzzed against the polished glass of my desk, shattering the quiet focus of my office. I had just begun sliding the preliminary financial reports into the red envelopes when Elias's name flashed across the screen for the second time today. A second call from a forensic accountant in 1 hour never brought good news. I picked up the phone, pressing it to my ear. "I thought you sent the complete file," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I did," Elias replied, his usually gravelly voice now tight with an urgency I rarely heard. But I kept digging into the origin of that $150,000 jewelry purchase. "Maya, you need to sit down. The capital for that diamond ring did not just come from the liquidated company assets. He split the funding source." I gripped the edge of my desk. "Explain it to me clearly, Elias. Where did the rest of the money come from?" I could hear him exhale sharply. "He took out a second mortgage on your home. He pulled out exactly $150,000 in equity last week." My vision tunneled. The house was my sanctuary, the very first major purchase I made entirely on my own after securing my position as a director. It was the physical manifestation of my independence and hard work. I had allowed Darius to add his name to the deed shortly after our wedding because his mother Shirley had endlessly guilt-tripped me about emasculating my husband. She claimed a true partnership meant sharing everything equally. I had foolishly compromised my boundaries for the sake of marital peace. "That is impossible," I stated, my mind racing through the legal requirements. "A second mortgage requires both signatures. I never signed any banking documents, Elias. I would have had to sit in front of a notary." "He forged it?" Elias said bluntly. I pulled the digitized application from the lender's portal. "The signature is a highly practiced imitation of yours." He also used a digital notary service, likely bribing someone or exploiting a loophole in the online verification process. The funds were dispersed directly into an account solely under his name and then wired immediately to the jeweler. The gravity of his betrayal settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Darius did not just cheat on me. He did not just insult me. He committed major financial fraud, risking the roof over my head to buy a diamond ring for another woman. I felt a cold, sharp rage completely replace any lingering shock. "And the motive?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Why risk federal prison for a ring?" "Because of the fiance," Elias explained, the pieces of his investigation snapping together. "I tracked Chloe's financial footprint as well. She has been systematically stealing from Julian's personal accounts for the past 8 months. She funneled that stolen capital directly to Darius to fund his fake high-value lifestyle. The custom suits, the country club dinners, the expensive car leases. Julian's money paid for all of it. But Julian is notoriously meticulous with his wealth. He started noticing the missing funds." I closed my eyes, visualizing the pathetic, desperate web they had woven. So Darius had to buy her the ring. I concluded, the entire scheme suddenly making perfect, sickening sense. "Exactly," Elias confirmed. "Chloe needed a cover story for the missing cash. She is going to tell Julian that she used the missing money to secretly commission her own custom engagement ring because she wanted to surprise him with her independent wealth. But she needed an actual flawless diamond to present to him to make the lie believable. Darius forged the mortgage on your house to buy that ring, effectively saving Chloe from Julian's wrath while continuing to leech off the very money she was stealing. It was a masterpiece of absolute stupidity. Darius and Chloe believed they could outsmart a venture capitalist billionaire and a crisis management director at the same time. They were two parasitic entities feeding off each other, using the resources of their far more successful partners to sustain their delusions of grandeur. "Send me the mortgage documents, the forged signature files, and the digital notary logs," I commanded. "I want everything printed and sent to my secure server within the next 10 minutes. I'm going to need extra paper." "Sending it now," Elias said. "Maya, be careful tonight. When you corner people who are facing federal fraud charges, they become unpredictable." "They should be the ones being careful," I replied, and disconnected the call. I walked over to the printer, watching as the fresh documents began sliding into the output tray. Page after page of undeniable proof. The forged signature stared back at me, a pathetic imitation of my handwriting. Darius had practiced this. He had sat somewhere in this very house, perhaps at this very desk, tracing my name over and over until he felt confident enough to steal my equity. My phone chimed from the center of the desk. I picked it up, unlocking the screen to see a new text message. The sender was Julian. I opened the message. It contained exactly 3 sentences. I audited Darius's firm. You were right. I will be there at 7 p.m. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. The trap was now fully armed, and the primary executioner had confirmed his arrival. Julian had seen the missing capital. He had seen the phantom projects. He knew Darius was a thief, but he did not yet know the full extent of Chloe's involvement. He did not know about the ring or the forged mortgage. That was my gift to him. I gathered the freshly printed documents from the tray. I organized them into distinct, targeted piles. My crisis management training took over completely, treating my own dining room table as a high-stakes boardroom. I walked over to the supply closet and pulled out a stack of elegant, heavy cardstock envelopes. They were a deep, rich crimson red, perfectly suited for the holiday season. I brought them back to the glass desk and sat down, meticulously assembling the instruments of their destruction. In the first red envelope, I placed the evidence of Darius's infidelity, the hotel receipts, the romantic text messages, and the wire transfers from our joint savings. This was the appetizer. In the second envelope, I placed Elias's forensic breakdown of the embezzled company funds, proving that Darius had been stealing Julian's venture capital to finance his fraudulent high-value image. This was the main course. In the third and thickest envelope, I placed the mortgage documents. I included the forged signature, the fake notary logs, and the receipt from the downtown jeweler for the $150,000 diamond ring. This was the dessert. I sealed each envelope with deliberate care. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a spool of thick metallic gold ribbon. I cut precise lengths of the ribbon, tying a flawless, intricate bow around each crimson package. They looked beautiful. They looked like the most thoughtful, expensive Christmas gifts a devoted wife could possibly prepare for her loving family. I picked up a gold calligraphy pen and began writing names on the front of the envelopes. I wrote Darius's name with smooth, elegant strokes. I prepared a special envelope for Shirley containing the bank statements showing exactly where the money for her luxurious catering and her extravagant church donations had truly come from. I prepared another for Keisha detailing the credit card debt she had racked up on my emergency accounts, completely exposing her fake socialite lifestyle to her husband. I stacked the crimson envelopes neatly in my arms and walked out of the home office. The house was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of the central heating and the faint scent of roasting duck from the kitchen. Elite catering had arrived through the service entrance an hour ago, quietly preparing the $5,000 feast Shirley had demanded. The catering staff moved like ghosts, setting up chafing dishes and arranging the fine china, completely unaware that they were preparing the last supper for a family of grifters. I walked into the formal dining room. The mahogany table was set to perfection. The Italian crystals sparkled under the warm glow of the chandelier. The white roses in the centerpiece looked pristine and innocent. I walked around the table, placing a red envelope at each specific place setting. I placed Darius's envelope directly on his imported charger plate. I placed Shirley's envelope precisely next to her crystal wineglass. I placed Keisha's envelope right where she would sit. Then I walked to the head of the table, the seat Darius usually claimed as the patriarch of the house. I moved his chair to the side and placed a new setting there. This seat was now reserved for Julian. I wanted Julian to sit at the absolute center of power, looking directly down the length of the table at the man who had stolen his money and the woman who had made a fool of him. I stepped back, admiring my work. The red envelopes with their gold ribbons popped vibrantly against the stark white tablecloth. They looked incredibly festive, masking the absolute financial and legal ruin contained within their heavy cardstock walls. I took a moment to adjust the lighting, dimming the overhead chandelier and turning on the sconces to cast long, dramatic shadows across the dining room walls. This was a psychological battlefield, and lighting was just another tool in my arsenal. Every detail mattered. The scent of the expensive Bordeaux Keisha had demanded was already breathing in crystal decanters on the sideboard. I had purchased exactly what she requested, spending my own money to facilitate their delusions one final time. It was a small price to pay to ensure they felt entirely secure right before the floor dropped out from underneath them. I wanted them relaxed. I wanted them intoxicated by their own grandeur. I traced my fingers along the edge of the mahogany table, feeling the solid wood beneath my touch. Darius had tried to steal this from me. He had looked around this beautiful home, a home I bled for, and decided he was entitled to leverage my security to impress a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient automated teller machine. The sheer disrespect was a poison, but the antidote was already sealed in those crimson envelopes. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed softly, signaling that it was 6 o'clock. The guests would be arriving shortly. Shirley and Pastor Thomas were likely already navigating the snowy roads, eager to show off their manufactured status. Chloe was likely adjusting her stolen diamond ring, practicing her fake aristocratic laugh. Darius was likely rehearsing his role as the benevolent, wealthy host. I smoothed the fabric of my crimson dress, ensuring it draped flawlessly over my silhouette. I checked my reflection in the dining room mirror. My posture was straight, my expression composed, and my eyes burned with a cold, calculated fire. I was no longer the accommodating wife. I was the crisis director, and I was about to orchestrate the most spectacular public relations disaster this family had ever seen. I heard the distant crunch of tires on the snowy driveway outside. The first act of my masterpiece was about to begin. The doorbell rang, a sharp, echoing chime that shattered the silence of the house. I took one final deep breath, letting the icy calm wash over every nerve ending in my body. I turned away from the dining room and walked down the long, illuminated corridor toward the front door, ready to welcome them into their own personalized hell. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the front door and pulled it open. The freezing winter air rushed into the foyer, bringing with it the overpowering scent of Shirley's signature floral perfume and the loud, performative laughter she reserved exclusively for church officials. Standing on my porch was a perfectly curated tableau of hypocrisy. Shirley stood front and center, wearing a tailored wool coat and a wide, artificial smile. Next to her was Pastor Thomas, a tall, imposing man who enjoyed the reverence Shirley constantly showered upon him. Trailing slightly behind them were Keisha and her husband Jamal. Shirley did not greet me. She did not even make eye contact. Instead, she turned her body slightly to ensure Pastor Thomas had an unobstructed view of the grand foyer, gesturing inward with a sweeping motion of her gloved hand. "Welcome to our home," Pastor Shirley announced, her voice pitched an octave higher than usual to project maximum sweetness. "Darius has worked so incredibly hard this year to provide such a beautiful space for his family. The Lord has truly blessed his real estate ventures. Please come in out of the cold." I stood to the side, my face maintaining a placid, welcoming mask. I noted the deliberate use of the word, "our home." Shirley loved claiming ownership of the luxury I provided, completely erasing my name from the narrative. Pastor Thomas stepped across the threshold, his eyes scanning the vaulted ceilings and the expensive artwork lining the hallway walls. He offered a dignified nod of approval. "It is a magnificent home, Sister Shirley," the pastor said, his deep voice echoing in the foyer. "The fruits of righteous labor are always a blessing to witness." "Good evening to you, Maya." "Good evening, Pastor Thomas," I replied smoothly. "We are honored to have you join us tonight." Shirley immediately stepped between us, physically blocking my interaction with the pastor. She unbuttoned her coat and thrust it blindly in my direction without turning her head. "Maya, take the pastor's coat." Shirley commanded, her tone dropping its sugary coating and adopting the sharp, dismissive clip she used for waitstaff. "And make sure the caterers are keeping the appetizers warm. Pastor Thomas has a sensitive stomach, and we cannot have him eating lukewarm food. I hope you instructed them to use the low-sodium broth for the duck glaze, as I specifically requested in the group chat." I caught the heavy wool coats in my arms. I did not bristle. I did not point out that she was treating the homeowner like a coat-check girl. I simply absorbed the disrespect, adding it to the mounting tab she was about to pay. "Everything is proceeding exactly according to your instructions, Shirley," I said, maintaining perfect eye contact when she finally bothered to look at me. The caterers are fully briefed. Nothing will be out of place tonight. Shirley gave a curt nod, satisfied that I had been sufficiently put in my place. She took the pastor by the arm and began guiding him toward the living room, eagerly pointing out the custom crown molding that my corporate bonus had funded 2 years ago. As they walked away, Keisha strutted through the front door. She stomped her designer boots on the welcome mat to shake off the snow. My eyes immediately dropped to the garment she was wearing. It was a stunning emerald green silk wrap dress from a boutique downtown. It fit her perfectly, hugging her curves and projecting an image of effortless wealth. It was also the exact dress I had purchased for her 32nd birthday last month because she called me crying about having nothing appropriate to wear to a networking event. She had sworn the event would lead to a high-paying job. Naturally, the job never materialized, but the dress remained a staple in her wardrobe. Jamal trudged in right behind her. He was weighed down by a massive stack of wrapped gift boxes, his shoulders slumped under the physical and emotional burden of being married to a professional parasite. Jamal was a decent man, an unassuming high school math teacher who had somehow been trapped in Keisha's relentless cycle of social climbing and financial irresponsibility. "Careful with those boxes," Jamal Keisha snapped, not offering to help him carry a single item. "The red one has the crystal decanter I bought for Darius. Do not drop it." I watched Jamal readjust his grip. I knew for a fact that the crystal decanter was purchased using a supplemental credit card linked to my primary account. Keisha had convinced Darius to give her the card for emergencies. Apparently, buying a lavish gift for her brother to show off in front of Chloe qualified as a dire emergency. Keisha finally noticed me standing by the coat closet. She offered a quick, insincere smile before turning back to her husband to continue her loud, calculated bragging. I knew she wanted her voice to carry into the living room so Shirley and the pastor could hear her. "I cannot wait for Chloe to get here," Keisha declared, running a hand down the silk fabric of the dress I bought her. She texted me earlier and promised she secured that limited edition Prada bag for me from her personal shopper in Paris. It is so refreshing to be around a woman who actually understands high fashion and old money aesthetics. Real luxury is just effortless for her. "Do you know what I mean, Maya?" She directed the final question at me, like a poisoned dart. She was baiting me, trying to provoke a reaction regarding my historically black university background versus Chloe's manufactured Ivy League persona. She wanted me to act defensive. I hung Shirley's coat on a cedar hanger. I turned back to Keisha, my expression radiating nothing but polite amusement. "I know exactly what you mean, Keisha," I replied, my voice smooth as glass. "Genuine luxury is entirely about the source of the capital. I am sure Chloe's gifts are going to be unforgettable tonight." Keisha smirked, taking my response as a concession of defeat. She flipped her hair and marched toward the living room, eager to join Shirley in the aggressive performance of status. Jamal lingered in the foyer for a moment. He placed the heavy stack of gifts on the console table and let out a long, exhausted sigh. He looked at me, the bags under his eyes speaking volumes about the reality of his marriage. Jamal knew exactly who paid for the emerald green dress his wife was wearing. He knew who paid the security deposit on their townhouse. He saw the truth, but he lacked the courage to confront the toxic family dynamic that was slowly draining his spirit. I met his tired gaze. We did not exchange words. We did not need to. I gave him a tight, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of the absolute absurdity happening around us. Jamal offered a subtle, defeated nod in return. He picked up the gifts again and walked slowly toward the living room, marching like a condemned man toward the gallows. I closed the front door, shutting out the freezing wind. I took a brief moment to adjust the cuffs of my crimson dress. The initial deployment of the enemy forces was complete. They had breached the perimeter and were currently making themselves completely at home in my territory. They were consuming my resources, drinking my wine, and weaponizing my wealth to diminish my presence. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. As I entered the living room, the scene was playing out exactly as I had predicted. Shirley was seated next to Pastor Thomas, on the expansive leather sectional, enthusiastically recounting a fabricated story about Darius's latest charitable donation to the community center. Keisha was standing by the fireplace posing subtly so the pastor could admire her expensive outfit. Maya Shirley barked, interrupting her own story the second I crossed the threshold. The pastor would like a glass of water with lemon. Room temperature. And where is the Bordeaux Keisha requested? I hope you let it breathe properly. Chloe will notice immediately if the tannins are too harsh. I walked over to the custom-built wet bar in the corner of the room. I retrieved a crystal tumbler, filled it with filtered water, and added a precise slice of lemon. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter containing the $300 Bordeaux I had purchased exclusively to indulge their delusions. The wine has been breathing for exactly 2 hours, Shirley, I said, carrying the silver tray toward the seating area. It is perfectly prepared for Chloe's refined palate. I handed the water to the pastor with a gracious nod. I poured a glass of the deep red wine and handed it to Keisha. She took it without saying thank you, immediately swirling the liquid in the glass and sniffing it with an exaggerated, pretentious expression. "Oh, this will do nicely," Keisha announced loudly. "Chloe is going to be so pleased. It is vital that we accommodate her standards tonight. Darius deserves a woman who understands how to elevate his profile." Shirley beamed at her daughter, rewarding the vicious insult directed at me. "Exactly," Shirley agreed. "A man's environment dictates his trajectory. Darius is finally surrounded by the right caliber of people." I stood perfectly still, holding the silver serving tray. I looked at the two women sitting in the house I owned, drinking the expensive wine I bought, wearing the designer clothes I funded. They were blindly worshipping a fake socialite and praying for my downfall. They were completely intoxicated by their own malice. "I am certain tonight will elevate everyone's profile," I said quietly, ensuring my voice carried just enough to be heard over the crackling fireplace. "We are going to address everyone's contributions to this family very clearly." Shirley frowned, detecting a slight shift in my tone, but unable to identify the threat. Before she could demand an explanation, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the top of the grand staircase. Darius was finally making his descent. He walked down the curved wooden stairs, his $2,000 suit catching the warm light of the chandelier. He checked his luxury watch, shooting his cuffs with practiced arrogance. He looked like a king descending to greet his loyal subjects. "Right on time," Darius announced, flashing a blinding smile at Pastor Thomas. The pastor stood up to shake his hand, greeting him with a robust embrace. "Darius, my boy," the pastor boomed. "Your mother has been telling me all about your phenomenal quarter at the firm. You are a true testament to the power of faith and hard work." Darius absorbed the praise like a sponge, his chest puffing out visibly. "God is good," Pastor Darius replied smoothly, patting the older man on the back. "Hard work always pays off in the end. I just want to provide the best for my family." He glanced at me, his eyes flashing with a patronizing warning. He wanted to make sure I was playing my part. I held the silver tray against my waist and offered him a demure, obedient smile. His ego swelled even further. Just then, the sharp trill of the doorbell rang out again. It was a precise, demanding sound that cut right through the pleasantries in the living room. Darius's face lit up with genuine excitement. He smoothed his tie and turned toward the foyer. "That must be Chloe," Darius announced, his voice practically trembling with anticipation. "Maya, why do you not go make sure the appetizers are ready? I will welcome our guest." He did not wait for my response. He turned his back on me and strode eagerly toward the front door, desperate to greet the woman who was helping him destroy his life. I did not move toward the kitchen. I stood my ground in the living room, watching the hallway intently. Shirley and Keisha leaned forward on the leather sofa, their faces glowing with excitement as they waited for their wealthy idol to appear. The trap was locked. The stage was set. The first major collision of the night was seconds away. I placed the silver serving tray down on the coffee table. I crossed my arms over my chest and waited for the illusion to walk through the door. The heavy oak door swung open, and the freezing winter air cascaded into the foyer once again. This time, it was accompanied by the sharp, echoing click of designer stilettos on the hardwood floor. I stood entirely still in the center of the living room, my arms crossed, watching the hallway with the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. She stepped over the threshold, bringing with her an overwhelming cloud of Chanel perfume. Chloe looked absolutely flawless, perfectly manifesting the aristocratic illusion she had spent years cultivating. She wore a pristine cream-colored cashmere coat, draped effortlessly over her shoulders, paired with a tailored silk dress that skimmed her figure. Her hair was styled in loose, expensive-looking waves that framed her delicately contoured face. She radiated a quiet, unbothered luxury that instantly captivated everyone in her immediate vicinity. It was a masterful performance of generational wealth executed by a woman who had grown up with absolutely nothing and survived solely by manipulating successful men. Darius stepped forward to greet her, his face flushed with a sickening mixture of pride and unrestrained desire. Chloe reached out, wrapping her arms around his neck in a greeting that lasted entirely too long for a casual holiday dinner. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder, letting her hands linger on the lapels of his $2,000 suit. Darius closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, breathing her in, completely abandoning any pretense of marital respect right in the entryway of my home. It was a brazen public display of their infidelity executed with the arrogant assumption that I was too meek or too desperate to challenge them. As she pulled away from his embrace, she strategically raised her left hand to adjust a stray lock of hair. The movement was calculated, designed specifically to catch the light cascading from the foyer chandelier. The sudden blinding flash of diamonds illuminated the space. It was an enormous custom-cut emerald diamond set in platinum, resting heavily on her ring finger. My breath caught in my throat, not from jealousy, but from the sheer audacity of the theft. I was staring directly at $150,000 of my own stolen home equity. Darius had forged my signature, compromised my financial security, and handed the proceeds to his mistress so she could parade it around as a symbol of her fake billionaire fiance's devotion. I studied the ring from across the room, my mind rapidly calculating the forensic trail Elias had uncovered. Chloe twisted her hand slightly, making sure the diamond caught the maximum amount of light. She believed that ring was her ultimate shield, a sparkling testament to her untouchable status. She had absolutely no idea it was actually the piece of evidence that would guarantee Darius a lengthy federal prison sentence. Darius placed a hand on the small of her back and guided her from the foyer into the formal living room. The dynamic in the room shifted instantaneously. Shirley practically leaped off the leather sofa, pushing past Pastor Thomas with a speed that completely defied her usual complaints about arthritis. Keisha let out an audible gasp of excitement, her eyes locking onto the massive diamond ring before Chloe had even fully entered the space. "Oh my goodness, Chloe!" Shirley practically shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch of pure desperation. "Look at you! You look absolutely radiant. And that ring. Lord have mercy, Julian has truly outdone himself this time. It is magnificent." Chloe offered a practiced, demure smile, holding her hand out gracefully, so Shirley and Keisha could inspect the stolen jewelry. She played the part of the bashful, wealthy bride to be with sickening perfection. "Julian is very traditional," Chloe purred, her fake mid-Atlantic accent dripping with condescension. "He insisted on working with a private jeweler in Antwerp to ensure the clarity was absolutely flawless. He said a woman of my background deserves nothing less than perfection." I watched Darius swallow hard, a nervous tick pulsing in his jaw. He had to stand there and listen to his mistress publicly credit another man for the extravagant gift he had committed massive financial fraud to purchase. His fragile ego was actively warring with his desperate need to maintain the deception. He forced a stiff, unnatural smile and nodded in agreement. "It is a very impressive piece," Darius muttered, his eyes darting toward me nervously to see if I was catching the subtle tension. I simply raised my eyebrows in polite agreement, offering him nothing but a blank, unreadable mask. Keisha was practically vibrating with envy. "It is breathtaking, Chloe. Simply breathtaking. I was just telling Jamal that Julian clearly understands how to cater to an old money aesthetic. It makes my little diamond look like a starter ring." Jamal, who was standing quietly by the fireplace, looked down at his shoes, visibly humiliated by his wife's relentless groveling. Chloe finally turned her attention away from her adoring audience and allowed her gaze to settle on me. I was standing near the wet bar, the deep crimson fabric of my dress, creating a sharp contrast against the dark mahogany wood. I did not move toward her. I forced her to cross the room to greet the owner of the house she was currently infiltrating. Chloe glided across the Persian rug, her stilettos sinking softly into the expensive fibers. She stopped 2 feet away from me, invading my personal space with the aggressive confidence of a woman who believed she had already won the war. She looked me up and down, her eyes performing a slow, calculating assessment of my appearance. Maya, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a register of sickly sweet manufactured sympathy. It is so generous of you to open your home to me tonight. I know the holidays can be incredibly difficult when you lack a proper support system. She reached out and placed a perfectly manicured hand on my forearm, her heavy diamond ring pressing cold and hard against my skin. It was a deliberate tactical strike masquerading as compassion. Darius mentioned, "You do not have much family of your own to celebrate with." Chloe continued, tilting her head with a look of profound pity. "He told me about your estrangement from your relatives. I totally understand why you need to hold on to Darius and his family so tightly. It must be terribly lonely to face the world without a rich heritage to fall back on. Do not worry, Maya, we are happy to share our joy with you tonight." The sheer level of disrespect was staggering. She was standing in the home I paid for, wearing an outfit funded by my stolen savings, displaying a ring purchased with my stolen equity, and she had the absolute nerve to pity me for lacking a wealthy heritage. She was utilizing the classic arsenal of respectability politics, trying to weaponize my independence and my self-made success as evidence of my inferiority. She wanted me to feel small. She wanted me to feel like a desperate, clinging dependent who relied on her cheating husband for social survival. A year ago, a comment like that might have provoked a fierce defensive argument. I might have listed my corporate achievements, my degrees, and my financial independence to prove my worth. But a crisis management director never defends their position when they already hold all the leverage. You do not argue with a hostage. I looked down at her hand resting on my arm. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I slowly raised my gaze to meet her eyes, locking onto her with a stare so completely devoid of emotion that I saw her pupils dilate in sudden, instinctual panic. I reached out and gracefully lifted her hand off my arm, taking her cashmere coat from her shoulders in one smooth, continuous motion. I held the expensive fabric over my arm, my posture radiating absolute terrifying control. "Oh, you do not need to worry about my support system, Chloe," I replied, my voice smooth, melodic, and sharp as a scalpel. "I am surrounded by absolutely all the family I need right here, and I never feel lonely. In fact, I invited a very special guest tonight, so you would not feel so lonely without your fiance." The air in the room seemed to instantly evaporate. Chloe's fake sympathetic smile twitched violently. The corners of her mouth dropped, and a flash of genuine, unadulterated terror sparked in her eyes. She stared at me, trying to decipher the hidden meaning behind my words, trying to calculate if I was bluffing or if I had somehow breached her carefully constructed wall of lies. Darius laughed, a loud, booming sound designed to shatter the sudden, suffocating tension. He stepped between us, clapping his hands together with forced joviality. "Maya is always making these bizarre corporate jokes," Darius declared, shooting me a warning glare. "She is just trying to be a gracious host. There are no surprise guests tonight. We are keeping it strictly intimate, just family and our most esteemed friends. Right, Maya?" I smiled warmly at my husband, enjoying the microscopic beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Absolutely, Darius. Just the people who truly deserve to be here." I turned away from them, carrying Chloe's cashmere coat toward the hall closet. I walked with slow, deliberate steps, savoring the chaotic energy I had just injected into their perfect evening. I hung the coat on a cedar hanger, smoothing out the fabric. The first crack in their foundation had been established. Chloe was shaken. Darius was overcompensating, and Shirley was distracted by her desperation to impress Pastor Thomas. They were completely unbalanced, exactly where I needed them to be. I walked back toward the living room, clapping my hands together once to command the room's attention. The sharp sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, silencing Shirley's ongoing monologue about her church activities. If everyone would please follow me, I announced, adopting the flawless commanding tone I used to direct shareholder meetings. Dinner is ready to be served. Please bring your drinks and proceed to the dining room. We have a wonderful evening ahead of us, and I want to ensure we stay perfectly on schedule. Shirley immediately took Pastor Thomas by the arm, leading the procession toward the dining room. Keisha and Jamal followed closely behind Keisha, whispering frantically to her husband about ensuring they sat near the pastor. Darius offered his arm to Chloe, leaning in to whisper something in her ear, likely trying to reassure her that my comment was meaningless. Chloe nodded, forcing her smile back into place, but her eyes remained wide and vigilant. I stood by the archway, watching the traitors march directly into the execution chamber. I waited until the last person crossed the threshold before following them in. I took my place at the side of the table, resting my hand on the back of my chair. I looked at the red envelopes sitting perfectly on the white tablecloth. I looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the seat reserved for the alpha predator who was currently navigating the snowy roads toward our home. The trap was fully loaded. All that remained was waiting for the doorbell to ring. The guests moved around the mahogany table, taking their assigned seats with various degrees of confusion and entitlement. Shirley immediately guided Pastor Thomas to the seat of honor on her right, while she took the chair to his left. Keisha and Jamal sat across from them. Darius naturally gravitated toward the head of the table, the chair he believed was his birthright. But as he reached for the carved wooden backrest, he stopped short. The seat had been shifted away, and a new, pristine place setting occupied the opposite head of the table. Darius looked at me, a flash of irritation crossing his features. "Maya, why is there an empty seat here? Are we expecting someone else?" I took my seat gracefully, smoothing the silk of my crimson dress. "Oh, I just felt the table looked more balanced this way," I replied smoothly. "Aesthetic symmetry is very important for holiday dinners. Please sit next to Chloe. I want you two to be as comfortable as possible tonight." Darius frowned, but complied, pulling out the chair next to his mistress. Chloe sat down, her eyes immediately falling on the crimson envelope resting against her crystal water glass. She reached out her massive stolen diamond, catching the chandelier light, and tapped the thick cardstock with a manicured fingernail. "What are these?" Chloe asked, her fake mid-Atlantic accent pitching upward with feigned delight. "Are we doing party favors now?" Shirley picked up her own envelope, examining the gold ribbon with a critical eye. "I did not authorize any party favors in the group chat, Maya. We are not hosting a children's birthday party. The pastor does not need a goodie bag." I smiled warmly at my mother-in-law, projecting nothing but compliant submission. "They are not party favors, Shirley. They are special Christmas gifts. A little token of my profound appreciation for everything each of you brings to this family. But they are meant to be opened after the main course. Consider them our dessert." Shirley sniffed dismissively and set the envelope back down. "Well, as long as it does not distract from the meal. The caterers have certainly outdone themselves. Darius, my wonderful son, thank you for providing such a magnificent feast for us." Darius puffed out his chest, accepting the praise for the $5,000 meal my corporate account had funded just hours prior. "It is my pleasure, Mother. I only want the best for my family and our distinguished guests." He nodded respectfully at Pastor Thomas, who beamed back with pastoral approval. "Before we partake in this bountiful harvest," the pastor rumbled, his deep voice carrying across the dining room, "I believe it is only fitting that the matriarch of this family leads us in grace. Sister Shirley, would you do the honors?" Shirley practically vibrated with self-importance. She stood up, smoothing her tailored wool coat, and extended her hands. Everyone at the table followed suit, bowing their heads and closing their eyes. Everyone except me. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the people sitting across from me, watching the grotesque performance unfold. "Heavenly Father," Shirley began, her voice dripping with artificial piety, "we come before you tonight to give thanks for the immense blessings you have showered upon this household. We thank you for my son Darius. We thank you for his tireless work ethic, his undeniable leadership, and his unwavering commitment to being a strong, high-value provider for his family. You have elevated him in his career, Lord, and we praise you for the financial abundance he so generously shares with us today. I watched Darius lower his head further, playing the role of the humble servant. He was soaking in the religious validation, completely ignoring the fact that he had forged my signature to steal $150,000 from our home equity. And Lord Shirley continued, her tone shifting to something even more sickeningly sweet. We want to offer a special prayer of gratitude for the new additions to our circle. We thank you for Chloe. Chloe shifted slightly in her seat, a modest smile playing on her lips. We thank you for her grace, her refinement, and the pure, elegant spirit she brings into our lives, Shirley proclaimed loudly. We pray that you continue to bless her upcoming union, and we thank you for allowing her to grace our table tonight. It is truly a blessing to be surrounded by people who understand the value of loyalty, honesty, and deep family values. In a world full of aggressive, selfish ambitions, we are grateful for women who know how to carry themselves with true class and dignity. The sheer magnitude of her hypocrisy was staggering. She was standing in a house I purchased, eating food I paid for, drinking wine I selected, and using a holy prayer to verbally assault me while praising a woman who was actively sleeping with her married son. Shirley was weaponizing her religion to validate a grifter simply because that grifter played the role of a wealthy socialite better than I played the role of a subservient mule. I kept my eyes locked on Chloe. The mistress had her head bowed, playing the part of the devout guest, but I could see the subtle smirk lifting the corner of her mouth. She was thoroughly enjoying her elevated status. She felt entirely untouchable. We pray for continued prosperity, Shirley concluded, her voice reaching a dramatic crescendo. We pray that this house remains a sanctuary of truth and righteous living. In your holy name we pray, Amen. Amen, the table chorused in unison. I did not say a word. I simply picked up my linen napkin and draped it across my lap. The performance immediately transitioned from religious piety to aggressive social climbing. Keisha reached for the crystal decanter I had placed on the table. She lifted it with exaggerated care, making sure everyone noticed her handling the expensive vintage. Chloe, I insisted we get the Chateau Margaux just for you, Keisha announced, pouring a generous measure into Chloe's glass. I know you are used to the absolute best. Darius told me you have a highly refined palate, so we could not possibly serve you anything less than a $300 bottle. Chloe picked up the glass by the stem, swirling the dark ruby liquid with a practiced flick of her wrist. She held it to her nose, closing her eyes as she inhaled the aroma. She was putting on a masterclass in fake aristocracy. Oh, Keisha, this is wonderfully thoughtful, Chloe purred, taking a small, delicate sip. It has a beautiful structure. Julian usually keeps a private cellar stocked with vintage Bordeaux, but this is a very acceptable selection for a home dinner. Thank you, Darius, for being so accommodating. Darius smiled proudly, completely ignoring the fact that my credit card had secured the very wine she was currently evaluating. Only the best for our guests, Chloe. Please, everyone, let us eat. The caterers have prepared a roasted duck that is supposed to be incredible. The clinking of silver forks against fine china began to echo through the dining room. Pastor Thomas took a generous portion of the truffle mashed potatoes, praising the culinary excellence of the house. Shirley beamed, taking credit for the menu selection. Jamal ate quietly, keeping his eyes on his plate, eager to avoid his wife's continuous bragging. The atmosphere was thick with manufactured joy. They were completely immersed in their collective delusion. They were safe, wealthy, and vastly superior to the woman sitting quietly in the crimson dress. They were just about to take their very first bite of the extravagant feast. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound that sliced right through the ambient noise of the dining room. The sudden chime echoed down the long hallway, abrupt and commanding. The forks stopped mid-air. The conversation died instantly. Darius frowned, his face twisting with genuine annoyance. He placed his silver fork down on the table, clearly irritated that his perfect patriarch performance had been interrupted. He looked at the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Who the hell is bothering us on Christmas?" Darius complained, his voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative bark. I specifically told the Neighborhood Watch Association we were not accepting any holiday carolers or charity collections tonight. We are having a private family dinner." He pushed his chair back, preparing to stand up and play the aggressive protector of the household. He wanted to go to the door and assert his dominance over whoever dared to interrupt his feast. I moved faster. I stood up slowly, the heavy silk of my crimson dress cascading perfectly around my legs. I did not rush. I moved with the fluid, calculated grace of a woman who was in absolute control of her environment. Every eye at the table turned toward me, sensing the sudden drastic shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "Relax, Darius," I said. My voice was no longer the accommodating, polite tone I had used in the foyer. It was a cold, resonant command that locked him to his chair. He stared at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Maya, what are you talking about? Who is at the door?" I placed my linen napkin neatly on the table, resting my hands on the high back of my chair. I looked directly into his eyes, holding his gaze with a terrifying, unwavering intensity. I let him feel the absolute absence of my fear. "It is just your Christmas present," I stated smoothly. I turned my back on the dining room and walked down the long, illuminated corridor toward the foyer. The heavy silence of the house followed me, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the hardwood. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, a collective wave of confusion and rising anxiety emanating from the dining table. I reached the heavy oak door. I did not hesitate. I gripped the brass handle and pulled it open, letting the freezing winter air flood into the entryway for the third time that night. Standing on my porch was a man who commanded empires. Julian was impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal overcoat layered over a tailored black suit. The snow fell softly around him, dusting the shoulders of his coat, but he looked completely immune to the cold. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered against his cheek. His dark eyes were burning with an intense, calculated fury that could strip the paint off the walls. He was not here for a social call. He was here for a corporate execution. "You are right on time, Julian," I said, stepping aside and gesturing into the warm, brilliantly lit foyer. "Please come inside. The board is ready for your review." Julian did not say a word. He gave a single curt nod, stepping over the threshold with heavy, purposeful strides. He radiated absolute power, carrying the weight of a billionaire who had just discovered he was being robbed by the very people he employed. I closed the door behind him, locking out the winter storm. The real storm was already inside the house. I guided Julian down the hallway, matching his rapid, aggressive pace. We turned the corner and stepped perfectly into the archway of the formal dining room. The trap snapped shut. The heavy silence that fell over the formal dining room was so absolute it felt as though the oxygen had been violently sucked from the air. Julian stood beside me in the archway, his dark eyes sweeping across the mahogany table with the cold, mechanical precision of a predator assessing its trapped prey. He did not say a single word. He simply let his immense presence dominate the space, allowing the sheer weight of his arrival to crush the manufactured joy they had been indulging in just moments before. The festive warmth of the chandelier light suddenly felt harsh and exposing, like a police spotlight shining directly into a dark alleyway. I watched the exact moment the realization hit Chloe. She was in the middle of taking another delicate practice sip of the $300 Bordeaux that Keisha had so eagerly poured for her. Her eyes drifted lazily toward the archway, expecting perhaps a caterer bringing the next course. Instead, she found herself staring directly into the unrelenting gaze of the billionaire fiance she had been systematically robbing for 8 months. The physical reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. All the color violently drained from Chloe's face, leaving her perfectly contoured makeup looking like a chalky theatrical mask painted on a corpse. Her mouth fell open in a silent, jagged gasp. The muscles in her hand completely gave out. The imported Italian crystal wine glass slipped right through her trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the floor, striking the edge of the mahogany table on its way down. The glass shattered with an explosive, deafening crash that echoed like a gunshot through the silent house. Deep, dark red wine splashed violently across the expensive Persian rug, spreading outward like a fresh blood stain. Shards of broken crystal scattered across the polished hardwood, glinting sharply in the ambient light. Chloe did not move to clean it up. She did not even look down at the ruined rug or the ruined dress she was wearing. She remained entirely paralyzed in her chair, her chest heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Her eyes were locked onto Julian wide with a raw, unadulterated terror that completely stripped away every single layer of her fake aristocratic persona. In that single shattering moment, she was no longer a refined socialite from a wealthy heritage. She was a desperate, terrified grifter who had just been caught red-handed. Darius reacted a fraction of a second later. He turned his head at the sound of the shattering glass, a scowl of irritation already forming on his features, fully prepared to scold whoever had broken my expensive crystal. But when his gaze followed the trajectory of Chloe's absolute panic and landed on the archway, the scowl vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unmitigated horror. Darius recognized Julian instantly. This was not just a wealthy guest. This was the majority stakeholder of the commercial real estate firm where Darius was supposedly employed. This was the man whose venture capital funds Darius had been actively embezzling to finance his pathetic illusion of a high-value lifestyle. Darius scrambled to stand up, moving so erratically that his knees slammed hard against the heavy wooden table, rattling the fine china, and causing Pastor Thomas to grab his water glass to steady it. Darius ignored the pain, his primary instinct screaming at him to defer to the alpha male in the room. He wiped his sweating palms down the front of his $2,000 custom suit, his professional facade collapsing into a display of pathetic subservience. Julian Darius stammered, his voice cracking horribly on the first syllable. "Sir, what a profound surprise. We had absolutely no idea you were in the neighborhood. Please come in." Darius attempted to project the confident, welcoming tone of a successful executive, but he sounded like a cornered animal begging for its life. He looked frantically between Julian and me, trying desperately to calculate how this collision of his two hidden worlds had occurred. His eyes darted to Chloe, who was still frozen in silent hysteria, and then back to Julian. Darius was visibly suffocating under the weight of his own lies, entirely unable to comprehend that his wife and his boss had orchestrated this execution together. Shirley looked back and forth between her panicked son and the imposing stranger in the archway. She could clearly sense the immense wealth and power radiating from Julian, but she lacked the context to understand the danger. She automatically slipped into her default mode of aggressive social climbing. "Darius, darling," Shirley said loudly, attempting to mask the chaotic tension with her overly sweet church voice. "Are you going to introduce us to your handsome colleague? Any friend of my successful son is always welcome at our holiday table, regardless of the unexpected arrival." Julian did not even glance at Shirley. He completely ignored her existence, keeping his dark, burning gaze locked entirely on the cheating couple. I stepped forward gracefully, cutting through the thick, suffocating tension with a cheerful, melodic tone that made Darius physically flinch. "Oh, there is no need for formal introductions just yet, Shirley," I announced, walking smoothly past the shattered glass and the spilled wine. "Julian is a very special, intimate connection to this family. I felt it was absolutely vital that he join us for dinner tonight. After all, the holidays are about bringing the people we care about together under one roof." I walked straight to the head of the table, wrapping my hands around the carved wooden backrest of the empty chair I had specifically prepared. I pulled it out with a deliberate scraping sound against the floorboards. "Please, Julian," I offered, gesturing toward the empty seat with a warm, inviting smile. "I saved this spot exactly for you. It offers the best view in the house." Julian stepped fully into the dining room. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence, unbuttoning his bespoke charcoal overcoat, but choosing not to take it off. He wanted them to know he was not here to stay. He was here to conduct business. He walked the length of the table, his heavy footsteps grinding small shards of broken crystal into the floor. He did not look at the extravagant roasted duck or the expensive truffle mashed potatoes. He only looked at his targets. He reached the head of the table and lowered himself into the chair. The geography of the room instantly transformed. Julian now sat at the absolute center of power, positioned directly across from Darius and Chloe. He had a completely unobstructed view of their sweating, terrified faces. I took my seat quietly to his right, folding my hands neatly in my lap, stepping back to let the master interrogator begin his work. The psychological torture commenced immediately. Julian leaned back in the heavy wooden chair, crossing one leg over the other. He rested his hands lightly on the armrests, projecting an image of total terrifying relaxation. He looked at Chloe, his expression shifting into a mask of polite, chilling curiosity. "Chloe, my love." Julian began, his deep voice smooth and dangerously soft. "I must admit I was quite surprised when Maya extended the invitation tonight. You told me you were spending Christmas evening at a private gala hosted by your old boarding school friends. Yet here you are enjoying a cozy, intimate family dinner in the suburbs." Chloe opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat worked convulsively, trying to force air past her paralyzed vocal cords. She looked down at her lap, suddenly hyper-aware of the massive stolen diamond ring resting on her finger, the ring she had intended to pass off as Julian's own purchase. She quickly shoved her left hand under the tablecloth, hiding the evidence of Darius's financial fraud, but Julian's sharp eyes tracked the movement effortlessly. "I hope the hospitality here meets your highly refined standards," Julian continued, leaning forward just an inch, turning the screws tighter. "Maya tells me they ordered the absolute best catering just for you. Tell me, darling, how are you enjoying your quiet evening with old friends?" Chloe swallowed audibly, a harsh scraping sound in the quiet room. "Julian, I can explain," she whispered, her fake accent completely vanishing, replaced by the raw, unpolished tone of her actual upbringing. "It is not what it looks like. I was just stopping by to drop off a gift. We were just leaving." "Leaving so soon?" Julian asked, feigning profound disappointment. "But the main course has not even been served, and it would be terribly rude to abandon your generous host." Julian slowly turned his head, shifting his dark, predatory gaze from the trembling mistress to the sweating husband. Darius visibly recoiled, pressing his spine hard against the back of his chair. "Darius," Julian said, speaking the name as if it were a foul taste in his mouth. "I must commend you on your beautiful home. It is quite a step up from the lifestyle one might expect given the recent economic downturns in the commercial sector. You must be working incredibly hard to maintain such a lavish environment for your lovely wife." Darius nodded frantically, his professional mask crumbling into desperate subservience. "Yes, Mr. Pierce. I work around the clock, sir. My family is my absolute priority. I dedicate every waking hour to securing their future." Julian smiled, a cold, razor-thin expression that did not reach his eyes. "I admire that level of dedication, Darius. In fact, your dedication to securing capital is exactly why I decided to audit your division this week. I was fascinated by the sheer volume of resources you managed to process on your own." The blood drained from Darius's face, leaving him looking exactly as pale and terrified as Chloe. The word audit hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Darius knew exactly what Julian had found. He knew the phantom projects and the missing millions had been uncovered. He looked at me, a silent, pathetic plea for help forming in his eyes, completely forgetting that I was the one who had locked him in this room with his executioner. "It is truly remarkable," Julian continued, keeping his voice perfectly conversational, "how a man can juggle so many demanding projects, maintain a beautiful home, and still find the time to entertain my fiance on Christmas Day. You are a man of many hidden talents, Darius, but tonight we are going to put all your cards on the table." The heavy silence that followed Julian's declaration hung over the dining room like a thick, suffocating fog. Darius was visibly trembling, his breath hitching in his throat as he stared at the billionaire sitting at the head of the table. Chloe remained completely paralyzed, her hands hidden beneath the white tablecloth, her fake aristocratic demeanor entirely shattered. The tension was sharp enough to draw blood. Yet completely oblivious to the catastrophic corporate execution happening right in front of him, Pastor Thomas decided it was the perfect moment to break the ice. The pastor chuckled, a deep booming sound that felt violently out of place in the room. He reached for his crystal goblet, raising it high above the immaculate centerpiece of winter greens and white roses. He looked around the table with a broad, benevolent smile, completely misreading the absolute terror radiating from Darius as some form of intense professional respect. "Well, now," Pastor Thomas began, his voice projecting with the practiced cadence of a Sunday morning sermon. I am not entirely sure what high-level corporate matters you gentlemen are discussing at the table tonight. But the holiday season is a time for celebration, not business. We are gathered here to honor family faith and the fruits of righteous labor. Shirley instantly latched onto the pastor's words, desperate to normalize the environment and regain her footing. She nodded vigorously, her artificial smile stretching across her face. Amen, Pastor. You are absolutely right. Let us focus on the blessings. Pastor Thomas turned his gaze directly toward my sweating, hyperventilating husband. He raised his glass higher, offering a toast to the man who was currently facing federal ruin. I want to raise a glass to Darius the pastor, announced loudly. It is not every day you see a young man rise to such incredible heights, a successful vice president at a prestigious commercial real estate firm. A man who provides this magnificent home for his family. But more importantly, a true pillar of our church community. You are a shining example to the young men in our congregation, Darius. You show them what it means to lead with integrity and grace. Darius looked like he was going to vomit. His face was a sickly shade of gray, his eyes wide and panicked. He did not reach for his glass. He did not acknowledge the toast. He just sat there completely frozen, waiting for the axe to fall. Julian did not raise his glass either. He simply picked up his heavy silver fork and knife. He moved with absolute, terrifying calm. He pressed his fork into the roasted duck on his plate, slicing a perfectly precise piece of meat. He chewed it slowly, his dark eyes never leaving Darius's face. He swallowed, placed his silverware neatly on the edge of his china plate, and finally turned his head to look directly at Pastor Thomas. A pillar. Julian repeated the word, rolling off his tongue with a distinct layer of chilling amusement. Fascinating. Julian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the mahogany table. He completely ignored Shirley's warning glare and addressed the pastor with the clinical tone of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. Tell me, Pastor Julian continued, keeping his voice smooth and conversational. What exactly does a pillar of your community look like? Does a pillar build his foundation on deceit? Because my auditors informed me yesterday that this particular pillar embezzled exactly $3 million of my personal venture capital. Pastor Thomas lowered his crystal goblet, his benevolent smile vanishing instantly. The color drained from his face as he looked from Julian to Darius, clearly struggling to process the magnitude of the accusation. I beg your pardon, the pastor stammered. You heard me correctly, Julian stated smoothly. Darius has been funneling my capital into a series of highly elaborate phantom projects. Fake contractors fabricated invoices, empty lots passed off as luxury developments. He constructed an entire fictional portfolio to steal my money and fund this pathetic illusion of wealth you see before you today. He is not a pillar pastor, he is a parasite. The dining room erupted. Shirley slammed her hands down on the table, causing the silverware to rattle loudly against the fine china. She completely abandoned her sweet, devout matriarch persona, her face contorting into a mask of aggressive, furious denial. She could not accept the reality that her golden child, her ultimate social currency, was being exposed as a fraud in front of the most important figure in her social circle. I will not sit here and listen to these demonic lies, Shirley shrieked, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Julian. How dare you come into our home and speak to my son this way in front of the pastor? You are just a jealous, bitter man trying to ruin a blessed family. My son is a vice president. He is highly respected in the corporate world. He manages million-dollar accounts. Shirley was hyperventilating desperately, trying to protect her own reputation. In her mind, Darius's title was a divine shield. It was the absolute proof of her success as a mother. If Darius was a criminal, then her entire identity as the righteous, successful church elder was a complete fraud. She turned to her son, practically begging him to speak. Darius, tell this man to leave. Shirley demanded, her voice shrill and panicked. Tell the pastor he is lying. Show him your credentials. Show him your corporate badge. Darius could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but his vocal cords were completely paralyzed by fear. He slumped in his chair, his shoulders caving inward, visually shrinking under the immense weight of his own guilt. Keisha, who had been aggressively silent since Julian walked in, finally realized the severity of the situation. Her eyes darted around the room in absolute horror. Her entire fake socialite lifestyle, funded completely by my credit cards, and her brother's stolen money was evaporating right before her eyes. Jamal, sitting next to her, simply picked up his wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip, watching the destruction of his abusive in-laws with a quiet, undeniable satisfaction. Shirley slammed her hand on the table again, refusing to surrender her delusion. "My son is a vice president!" She screamed again, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I decided it was time to put her out of her misery. "Shirley, stop talking," I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it cut through her hysterical shouting like a razor blade. The absolute authority in my tone forced her to snap her mouth shut. She glared at me, her eyes burning with pure hatred, but she did not dare speak another word. I commanded the space entirely. I reached out with a steady, unhurried motion. My manicured fingers grazed the thick cardstock of the first crimson envelope resting on the white tablecloth. The gold ribbon gleamed beautifully under the chandelier light. I picked it up, feeling the heavy weight of the printed documents inside. This was the moment I had meticulously prepared for. This was the exact second the carefully constructed facade of my marriage permanently shattered. I looked directly at Shirley, my expression radiating nothing but cold clinical reality. "He is not a vice president, Shirley," I said smoothly, tossing the red envelope across the mahogany table. It landed directly in front of her dinner plate with a soft, definitive thud. "He was fired for gross misconduct and theft 4 weeks ago." Shirley stared at the red envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She shook her head violently, refusing to touch it. "That is a lie," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He goes to the office every single day. He wears his suits. He takes his briefcase. He drives to a coffee shop downtown and sits there for 8 hours a day, scrolling through job boards on his phone because he is too cowardly to admit he destroyed his career." I clarified, exposing the pathetic routine Darius had been performing for an entire month. I did not wait for her to open the envelope. I knew exactly what was inside, and I was going to read the charges to the entire room. "Inside that festive little package, surely is his official termination letter," I announced, ensuring my voice carried clearly to Pastor Thomas. "It details exactly how the firm's internal security caught him fabricating invoices. It outlines the immediate suspension of his corporate credentials. It also includes the police report filed by the firm's legal department, confirming that he was escorted out of the high-rise building by armed security guards in front of all his colleagues." Darius let out a pathetic, stifled sob. He buried his face in his hands, completely unable to bear the absolute humiliation of his exposure. The high-value man was currently crying into his cloth napkin, stripped of his title, his money, and his fake pride. I kept my eyes locked on Shirley, watching her world collapse. "He is not a provider, Shirley. He is a parasite. For the last 4 weeks, his expensive car lease, his custom-tailored suits, and the very food you are eating tonight have been paid for entirely by me. I have been funding your arrogant delusions while your son actively plotted to steal my assets." Pastor Thomas stood up slowly, pushing his chair back from the table. His face was a mask of profound disappointment and shock. He looked down at Darius, the man he had just praised as a shining beacon of integrity, and then looked at Shirley. "Sister Shirley," the pastor said, his deep voice vibrating with righteous indignation. "Is this true? Has your son been masquerading in the house of the Lord with stolen wealth?" Shirley could not answer. She stared at the red envelope on the table, her hands trembling violently. She was trapped. She could not weaponize her religion, and she could not hide behind her son's fake title. She was completely exposed to the judgment of the one man whose opinion she valued more than oxygen. Julian leaned back in his chair, a look of grim satisfaction settling over his sharp features. He had successfully dropped the first nuclear bomb on Darius's professional life, and I had detonated the explosive charges directly on his personal life. The firm foundation of respectability politics that this family worshipped was currently burning to the ground. But I was not finished. The first envelope was merely the appetizer in this banquet of consequences. I turned my attention away from the hyperventilating matriarch and shifted my gaze directly toward the silent, paralyzed woman sitting next to my sobbing husband. Chloe was trying to make herself invisible, shrinking down into her chair, praying that the crossfire would somehow miss her. She was tragically mistaken. The real destruction was just beginning, and I was about to serve the main course. Chloe realized the sinking ship of Darius's life was taking on water fast, and she had zero intention of drowning with him. Her survival instincts, honed from years of grifting her way through high society, kicked in with violent speed. She completely abandoned the man she had been clinging to in the foyer just an hour earlier. She shoved her chair back so forcefully it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. In one desperate theatrical motion, she lunged across the distance separating her from the head of the table. She threw herself toward Julian, her hands desperately clawing at the sleeve of his bespoke charcoal overcoat. Genuine tears began to well in her eyes, welling up and spilling over her perfectly applied mascara. She looked up at the billionaire with an expression of profound manufactured betrayal. "Baby, you have to listen to me," Chloe cried out. Her voice was trembling, entirely stripped of the haughty, refined cadence she had used to impress Keisha earlier. "I had absolutely no idea. I swear to you, Julian, he lied to me. Darius manipulated me from the very beginning. He told me he was a wealthy executive. He told me he wanted to help me plan our wedding. I did not know he was stealing from you. You have to believe me, baby. I am the victim here." It was a stunning performance. If I had not read the text messages where she explicitly demanded Darius wire her funds from my account, I might have actually applauded her acting skills. She squeezed Julian's arm, burying her face against his coat, playing the fragile, deceived maiden to absolute perfection. Julian did not move. He did not comfort her. He did not pull away. He simply looked down at the woman clinging to his arm with an expression of clinical detached disgust, as if a diseased insect had crawled onto his clothing. He slowly raised his right hand and deliberately peeled her manicured fingers off his coat one by one. He dropped her hand back onto the table with a dull thud. "Please do not insult my intelligence," Chloe Julian stated. His voice was incredibly calm, which made it vastly more terrifying than if he had yelled. "You see, when a man manages billions of dollars in capital, he does not just audit his companies, he audits his entire life. And when I noticed a consistent, inexplicable drain on my personal secondary accounts, over the last 8 months, I did not just look at the ledgers, I looked at the beneficiary." Chloe's fake sobs hitched in her throat. She stared at him, the color completely draining from her tear-streaked face. She realized in that singular moment that the man she thought she was manipulating had been quietly hunting her for months. "You thought you covered your tracks," Julian continued, leaning forward to lock eyes with her. "You thought using encrypted messaging apps and routing my money through Darius's shell companies would mask the scent. But you forgot one crucial detail, darling. You were using a phone registered to my corporate data plan." Julian reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced his sleek black smartphone. He placed it carefully on the mahogany table, positioning it exactly halfway between himself and Chloe. He tapped the screen once, unlocking it, and navigated to a specific audio file. Pastor Thomas Julian said, his eyes never leaving Chloe. "You spoke earlier of righteous labor and building a strong foundation. I think you should hear exactly what kind of foundation this young woman was attempting to build within your community." Julian pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear, captured directly from the device's internal microphone. The entire dining room sat in dead, paralyzed silence as Chloe's voice echoed from the small speaker. But it was not the elegant old money voice she had used to charm Shirley and Keisha. It was a harsh, whiny, deeply unrefined tone. "I do not care how you get the money, Darius." The recorded version of Chloe snapped the audio, filling the tense room. "Just pull it from Julian's account again. He is a billionaire. He does not even notice when 50,000 drops off the radar. You are the vice president, figure it out." A sharp intake of breath came from Pastor Thomas. Shirley pressed her hands against her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Darius, still slumped in his chair, let out a pathetic groan, burying his head deeper into his arms. But the recording was not over. It was about to get significantly worse. "I am tired of riding around in that basic sedan of yours," Chloe's recorded voice whined aggressively. If we are going to do this, if I'm going to keep dealing with your boring, uptight wife, you need to step up. Use Julian's cash and go buy that Porsche Panamera we looked at yesterday. I want the custom leather interior. Do it tomorrow. We need to look like an actual power couple when we drive through downtown. Julian is too busy with his mergers to care about me, so his money is going to fund our lifestyle. Get it done, Darius. The recording clicked off, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt heavy enough to crush bone. The illusion of the sophisticated, wealthy socialite was instantly obliterated, replaced entirely by the reality of a cheap common thief demanding luxury vehicles bought with stolen cash. Keisha stared at her idol in absolute horror. The woman she had practically worshipped, the woman she had desperately tried to impress, with a $300 bottle of wine, had just been exposed as nothing more than a common criminal who spoke like a teenager throwing a temper tantrum. Jamal took another slow sip of his wine, hiding a distinct smirk behind the crystal rim. Pastor Thomas looked physically ill. The devout man of God had just been forced to listen to raw, unfiltered greed and adultery. He looked at Shirley, his expression hardening into severe judgment. This was the refined, elegant guest she had proudly brought to the table. This was the woman Shirley had praised in her opening prayer. The sheer embarrassment radiating from my mother-in-law was palpable. She looked like she wanted the expensive hardwood floor to open up and swallow her whole. Chloe was completely speechless. The undeniable proof of her betrayal had been broadcast to the entire room. She could not claim the audio was faked. She could not blame Darius for manipulating her. The recording proved she was the architect of the theft, actively directing Darius to embezzle funds so she could play the role of a wealthy power couple. The facade crumbled entirely. Tears of genuine panic spilled down Chloe's cheeks, mixing with her expensive foundation and mascara. Dark streaks ran down her face, staining the collar of her immaculate cashmere coat. Her shoulders slumped, her perfect posture collapsing under the weight of her exposure. The untouchable old money elegance she had weaponized against me was gone, destroyed by the sound of her own greedy voice. She looked pathetic. She looked exactly like the desperate, empty shell she truly was. Julian picked up his phone and slid it back into his pocket with a smooth, decisive motion. He looked at Chloe, his face devoid of any anger, displaying only cold, absolute finality. A power couple, Julian repeated the words, dripping with lethal sarcasm. You sold a life of limitless potential for a chance to ride in a leased Porsche with a fired middle management fraud. Your lack of vision is almost as offensive as your theft. We are finished, Chloe. Chloe opened her mouth, a desperate gasping sob escaping her lips, but Julian held up a single finger, cutting her off instantly. Do not speak, he commanded. Do not insult me further with your voice. You will sit there in silence until I decide what to do with you. She obeyed. She shrank back into her chair, wrapping her arms around her stomach, weeping silently into her lap. The threat of Julian's retaliation was absolute. She had crossed a billionaire, and she knew he possessed the resources to destroy her life with a single phone call. I observed the wreckage of the dining room from my seat. The alpha predator had neutralized his target with ruthless efficiency. Darius was weeping silently into his hands. Chloe was a shattered, streaked mess. Shirley was hyperventilating, her precious social standing reduced to ashes in front of the pastor. Keisha was staring blankly at the wall, her illusions of high society completely destroyed. The appetizers had barely cooled on their silver platters, and the evening was already a catastrophic bloodbath. But I had promised them a full-course meal, and I intended to deliver exactly what I had prepared. Julian had handled the corporate embezzlement and the fraudulent engagement. It was now time for me to address the intimate personal betrayals that this family had inflicted upon me for years. It was time for the black tax to be collected, audited, and permanently canceled. I stood up slowly, the sound of my movement drawing every terrified eye at the table toward me. I smoothed the skirt of my crimson dress, maintaining an aura of absolute unshakable calm. I looked down at the pristine white tablecloth, my gaze resting on the remaining red envelopes tied with their beautiful gold ribbons. I picked up the stack of heavy cardstock envelopes, holding them carefully in my left hand. I walked around my chair, stepping into the open space of the dining room. The ambient light from the chandelier cast a warm glow over the festive red paper, creating a striking contrast to the absolute misery suffocating the guests. "It seems our special guest has successfully delivered his holiday tidings," I announced, my voice ringing out clear and strong in the quiet room. "Julian, thank you for providing such vital context to the evening's proceedings. It certainly helps clarify the family dynamics at play here tonight." I turned my attention to the sweating, trembling figures seated around my dining table. "Now that we have established the professional truth," I continued, "it is time we move on to our family traditions. As I mentioned earlier, I prepared specific gifts for each of you, tokens of my profound gratitude for the unique ways you have contributed to my life and to this marriage." I walked slowly behind Darius's chair. He flinched as I passed, burying his head deeper into his arms, terrified of what I might do. I did not touch him. I simply kept walking, my heels clicking rhythmically, signaling the arrival of the final reckoning. I approached Keisha first. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with apprehension. The smug, entitled woman who had demanded $300 wine just an hour ago was now shaking in the emerald green silk dress I had bought her. I held out the first red envelope, offering it to my sister-in-law with a polite, terrifying smile. "Merry Christmas, Keisha," I said softly. "I think you will find this gift incredibly enlightening. It details exactly how you have been funding your luxurious lifestyle." Keisha stared at the envelope, too afraid to reach out and take it. I placed it gently on the table right in front of her. Jamal leaned forward, his tired eyes fixing on the red paper with intense curiosity. I moved down the table, holding the thickest, heaviest envelope in my hand. I stopped directly behind Shirley's chair. She stiffened, refusing to look at me, keeping her eyes fixed desperately on Pastor Thomas, begging him silently to intervene. But the pastor remained silent, watching the execution unfold with grim, unyielding judgment. I leaned down, placing the thick red envelope right next to Shirley's untouched crystal water glass. "And for you, Shirley," I whispered, ensuring the pastor could hear every single word. "A detailed account of your devout Christian charity. I promise you the truth is far more interesting than any prayer you could possibly invent." I stood back up, surveying the table. The final phase of the operation was initiated. The remaining envelopes held the power to destroy their marriages, their reputations, and their freedom. I was about to drop the matches on the gasoline, and I was going to enjoy watching it all burn. Then the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, piercing sound that sliced right through the ambient noise of the dining room. The sudden chime echoed down the long hallway, abrupt and commanding. The fork stopped mid-air. The conversation died instantly. Darius frowned, his face twisting with genuine annoyance. He placed his silver fork down on the table, clearly irritated that his perfect patriarch performance had been interrupted. He looked at the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Who the hell is bothering us on Christmas?" Darius complained, his voice dropping into a harsh, authoritative bark. "I specifically told the Neighborhood Watch Association we were not accepting any holiday carolers or charity collections tonight. We are having a private family dinner." He pushed his chair back, preparing to stand up and play the aggressive protector of the household. He wanted to go to the door and assert his dominance over whoever dared to interrupt his feast. I moved faster. I stood up slowly, the heavy silk of my crimson dress cascading perfectly around my legs. I did not rush. I moved with the fluid, calculated grace of a woman who was in absolute control of her environment. Every eye at the table turned toward me, sensing the sudden drastic shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "Relax, Darius," I said. My voice was no longer the accommodating, polite tone I had used in the foyer. It was a cold, resonant command that locked him to his chair. He stared at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Maya, what are you talking about? Who is at the door?" I placed my linen napkin neatly on the table, resting my hands on the high back of my chair. I looked directly into his eyes, holding his gaze with a terrifying, unwavering intensity. I let him feel the absolute absence of my fear. "It is just your Christmas present," I stated smoothly. I turned my back on the dining room and walked down the long illuminated corridor toward the foyer. The heavy silence of the house followed me, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of my heels against the hardwood. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, a collective wave of confusion and rising anxiety emanating from the dining table. I reached the heavy oak door. I did not hesitate. I gripped the brass handle and pulled it open, letting the freezing winter air flood into the entryway for the third time that night. Standing on my porch was a man who commanded empires. Julian was impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal overcoat layered over a tailored black suit. The snow fell softly around him, dusting the shoulders of his coat, but he looked completely immune to the cold. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle feathered against his cheek. His dark eyes were burning with an intense, calculated fury that could strip the paint off the walls. He was not here for a social call. He was here for a corporate execution. "You are right on time, Julian," I said, stepping aside and gesturing into the warm, brilliantly lit foyer. "Please come inside. The board is ready for your review." Julian did not say a word. He gave a single curt nod, stepping over the threshold with heavy, purposeful strides. He radiated absolute power, carrying the weight of a billionaire who had just discovered he was being robbed by the very people he employed. I closed the door behind him, locking out the winter storm. The real storm was already inside the house. I guided Julian down the hallway, matching his rapid, aggressive pace. We turned the corner and stepped perfectly into the archway of the formal dining room. The trap snapped shut. I walked back to my seat, my heels echoing in the terrifyingly quiet room. I returned to my position at the table, folding my arms and looking down at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. Darius was staring at the red envelope resting against his pristine white charger plate. His hands were shaking so violently, he had to press them flat against the mahogany wood to steady himself. "Open it." Darius the First commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy silence. He hesitated, his eyes darting toward Julian, then back to me, silently pleading for mercy that did not exist. I said, "Open it." He reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the gold ribbon. The thick cardstock envelope spilled its contents onto his plate. Two separate stacks of paper slid out. The first was a set of divorce papers. My signature was already executed flawlessly in black ink on the bottom line. I had expedited the filing yesterday morning. But it was the second document that made his breath completely stop. It was a drafted criminal complaint meticulously prepared by my legal team, detailing the federal offense of wire fraud and forgery. It outlined exactly how he had faked my signature on a digital notary platform to pull $150,000 in equity from my home. "You thought you were so incredibly smart," I said, leaning in just close enough for him to hear the absolute contempt in my tone. "You thought you could leverage the sanctuary I built to buy a diamond for a woman who was actively stealing from your boss. That document has already been forwarded to the district attorney. You are not just losing your marriage today, Darius. You are losing your freedom. I hope the custom suits and the leased luxury cars were worth a federal prison sentence." Darius let out a ragged, choking sound. He looked at the printed evidence of his forgery. He knew he left a digital trail. He knew he could not dispute the internet protocol addresses or the bank routing numbers. He was entirely trapped. He slumped forward, his forehead nearly resting on the table, weeping openly as the reality of his impending incarceration crushed him. I did not waste another second on his tears. I shifted my focus down the table to Keisha. She was staring at her own red envelope with wide, terrified eyes. Jamal, sitting beside her, leaned forward. His usual exhausted demeanor was replaced by a sharp, intense curiosity. "Open it, Keisha," Jamal said, his voice surprisingly firm. "Let us see exactly what your sister-in-law brought for you." Keisha swallowed hard, her hands shaking just as badly as her brother's. She tore the envelope open. A thick stack of credit card statements cascaded onto the table. Every single luxury purchase she had made over the last 2 years was highlighted in bright yellow ink. The emerald green silk dress she was currently wearing. The $300 bottles of wine she demanded for dinner. The designer shoes she flaunted at her networking events. The security deposit on her townhouse. It was a comprehensive ledger of a parasitic lifestyle. Jamal picked up the statements. His eyes scanned the highlighted rows, doing the mental math that he was so highly trained for as a teacher. The color drained from his face. Keisha immediately launched into frantic defensive lies. Jamal, baby, I can explain, she stammered, reaching for the papers. Darius told me he was giving me an allowance. He said his firm was doing so well that he wanted to bless his sister. He gave me a corporate card. I did not know it was Maya's money. I swear I did not know. I cut her off with a cold, humorless laugh. It was not a corporate card, Keisha. It was my emergency American Express card. The one I explicitly set aside for medical emergencies. You knew exactly whose name was embossed on the front of that plastic when you handed it to the cashier at the Prada boutique. You actively participated in draining my assets while sitting in my living room mocking my education and my background. You wanted to play the role of an old money socialite so desperately that you turned yourself into a common thief. Jamal dropped the bank statements onto the table. The look of profound disgust on his face was absolute. He looked at his wife, truly seeing the ugly, grasping reality of her character for the first time. I work 60 hours a week grading papers and running after school programs to keep a roof over our heads, Jamal said, his voice deadly quiet. I skipped visiting my own mother for Thanksgiving because you told me we could not afford the plane tickets. And all this time you were stealing from Maya to buy designer dresses and crystal decanters to impress a woman who is literally sleeping with your married brother. You make me sick to my stomach. Jamal stood up from the table. He did not yell. He did not throw anything. The quiet finality of his departure was vastly more devastating than any screaming match could have been. I am done, Keisha, Jamal stated, dropping his linen napkin onto his chair. Do not come back to my house tonight. I will have your belongings packed in garbage bags and left on the porch by morning. Keisha let out a hysterical wail, grabbing for his arm, but he pulled away with forceful disgust. He offered me a single respectful nod, then turned and walked out of the dining room, the front door closing firmly behind him. Keisha buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as her marriage evaporated. 2 targets neutralized. I turned my attention to the final and most arrogant adversary in the room. Shirley was sitting frozen next to Pastor Thomas. She was staring at her thick red envelope as if it were a bomb counting down to 0. The sweet, devout matriarch persona she had worn all evening had completely melted away, leaving behind a terrified, grasping woman who knew her social currency was about to be revoked. Open it, Shirley, I commanded. Let us show the pastor exactly how devoted you are to the church. Shirley shook her head violently. No, I will not participate in this demonic attack on my family. You are a wicked, spiteful woman, Maya. Pastor, please do not listen to her lies. Pastor Thomas did not look at Shirley. He looked directly at me, his expression grave and unyielding. What is in the envelope, Maya, the pastor asked. Since Shirley refused to open it, I gladly recited the contents from memory. Last month, Shirley made a highly publicized, incredibly generous donation to your church building fund. I began keeping my tone strictly factual. $50,000. It was a grand gesture that conveniently secured her position as the head of the elder board. She stood at the pulpit and testified about how the Lord had blessed her family's finances, allowing her to give back to the congregation. Shirley let out a strangled gasp, reaching out to cover the red envelope with her hands, as if she could hide the truth by physically shielding the paper. The Lord provides for those who are faithful, Shirley cried out, her voice cracking with sheer desperation. It was a holy offering. It was a stolen offering. I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. I took a step closer, ensuring she could not escape my gaze. That $50,000 was wired directly out of my private retirement account. Darius liquidated my mutual funds, transferred the cash to a shell account, and then wrote you a cashier's check so you could buy your prestige at the church. You did not give the Lord a single dime of your own money, Shirley. You presented stolen goods at the altar to inflate your own pathetic ego. Pastor Thomas stood up from the table. He was a large man, and his physical presence commanded immediate authority. The look of profound biblical outrage on his face was terrifying. He stared down at Shirley, who was now trembling so violently her pearls rattled against her collarbone. Sister Shirley, the pastor thundered, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. You stood in the sanctuary of God and lied to my face. You used the sacred act of tithing as a tool for your own vanity, and you funded it with money your son stole from his own wife. You have defiled the sanctity of our church. Shirley fell to her knees right there in the dining room. She reached out, grabbing the hem of the pastor's jacket, weeping with absolute hysteria. Pastor, please, I did not know. I swear I did not know where the money came from. Darius told me it was a bonus from his firm. Please do not remove me from the board. My reputation is all I have left. Do not let this ruin me in front of the congregation. The pastor pulled his jacket away from her grasping hands with supreme disgust. Your reputation is nothing but a monument to your own greed, Shirley. You are officially stripped of all your titles within the church. Do not return to my congregation. I will personally ensure that the stolen $50,000 is refunded to Maya's accounts by tomorrow morning. We do not accept blood money. Pastor Thomas turned to me, his expression softening into one of deep, respectful sympathy. Maya, I am profoundly sorry for the darkness you have had to endure in this family. You have my deepest apologies. I nodded gracefully. Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate your integrity. Pastor Thomas turned his back on the weeping matriarch on the floor. He walked out of the dining room without looking back. The heavy silence descended again, broken only by the sounds of three completely shattered people sobbing over the ruins of their own malicious choices. I stood tall at the end of the table, breathing in the sweet scent of absolute victory. The front door clicked shut behind Pastor Thomas, sealing the destruction of Shirley's social existence. The echo acted as a starting gun for the final phase. The silence in the dining room was gone, replaced by the pathetic sounds of weeping. I remained standing at the head of the table, absorbing the collapse of the people who treated my life like a disposable resource. Julian was not finished. He slowly turned his head away from the sobbing matriarch and fixed his dark gaze back onto the woman sitting across from him. Chloe had stopped crying. She was sitting in catatonic shock, staring blankly at the shattered crystal and spilled wine. She looked like a cornered animal waiting for the final blow. Take it off, Julian commanded. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying pull that demanded immediate obedience. Chloe blinked, her eyes darting up to his face. What? She whispered, her voice trembling. The ring, Chloe. Julian clarified, his tone dripping with lethal condescension. Take the $150,000 stolen diamond ring off your finger and place it on the table. You are not walking out of this house with evidence of federal wire fraud on your hand. And you are certainly not walking out of here pretending you are engaged to me. Chloe instinctively clutched her left hand to her chest, protecting the jewel. Julian, please, she begged, her fake aristocratic accent completely gone. It was just a mistake. I can make it right. We can fix this. There is no we, Julian stated, standing up. He towered over her, casting a dark shadow across the table. And there is nothing to fix. You are a profoundly boring cliché, Chloe. Do you honestly believe I never investigated your background? You sold my colleagues a ridiculous fairy tale about generational wealth and trust funds, but I know exactly who you are. He leaned forward, closing the distance between them. I know you grew up in a trailer park outside of Detroit, Julian said, his voice harsh. I know your father was a low-level grifter, and your mother filed for bankruptcy 3 times. I know you attended community college for exactly 1 semester before dropping out to pursue your actual career, which consists entirely of targeting wealthy men at charity galas and draining their bank accounts. You have been running this pathetic con for a decade. You are not old money, Chloe. You are just old baggage. The absolute exposure of her deepest secret broke her completely. The mask of high society elegance evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified fraud. She looked around the room, making eye contact with Keisha. Keisha stared back at her with an expression of pure disgust. Chloe realized she had absolutely no allies left. Her hand shook violently as she slid the massive diamond off her ring finger. She placed it on the white tablecloth, pushing it slowly toward Julian. It caught the chandelier light, a sparkling monument to Darius's stupidity. Julian picked up the ring and dropped it into his coat pocket. He looked at me, offering a single respectful nod. It has been an incredibly enlightening evening, Maya. I appreciate the invitation. My legal team will be in contact with the authorities regarding the embezzled capital. He turned and walked out of the dining room, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. The front door opened and closed again. The alpha predator had claimed his pound of flesh and departed, leaving me alone to deal with the scavenging remains of my husband's family. The reality of Julian's departure and the impending legal disaster finally snapped Darius out of his weeping stupor. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and swollen, his expensive custom suit wrinkled with tears. He threw himself out of his chair, scrambling around the mahogany table until he stood directly in front of me. "Maya, you cannot do this," Darius pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You cannot send those files to the district attorney. Please, baby, listen to me. I was out of my mind. I made a terrible mistake. But we are married. We took vows. You cannot send your husband to federal prison." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, chilling emptiness. "Do not dare invoke our vows, Darius," I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You broke our vows the second you invited that grifter into your bed. But I am not sending you to prison for infidelity. I am sending you to prison because you forged my signature. You stole the equity out of my home to buy another woman a diamond ring. You did not make a mistake. You executed a calculated theft against your own wife. I will pay it back," Darius begged, dropping to his knees right there on the hardwood floor. "I will work 3 jobs. I will sell the cars. I will do whatever it takes to make the accounts whole again. Just please call the lawyers. Tell them to stop the filing. I will do anything, Maya. I am begging you." "You cannot pay it back," I stated clinically. "Because you have no job, you have no assets, and by tomorrow morning you will have no reputation. You are a hollow shell of a man, Darius. You spent years parading around this city, pretending to be a high-value provider while secretly draining my bank accounts to fund your pathetic ego. You belong in a cell." While Darius wept on the floor, Shirley finally found her voice. The matriarch was still kneeling by her chair, her tailored wool coat crumpled around her knees. She crawled forward, ignoring the shards of broken crystal on the Persian rug. She looked up at me, her face completely stripped of its usual arrogant superiority. "Maya, please," Shirley cried out, her voice raw and desperate. "Have mercy on us. If this goes public, I will be ruined. The church board will permanently excommunicate me. My friends will never speak to me again. The shame will literally kill me. You have proven your point. You have won. Please do not destroy our lives like this." "You destroyed your own life, Shirley," I replied, my voice smooth and unforgiving. "You stole $50,000 from my retirement account to buy your fake prestige at that church. You worshipped your own vanity, and you used my hard-earned money as your offering. You sat at this very table tonight and prayed for my downfall while pouring wine for your son's mistress. Do not ask me for mercy. You exhausted my mercy years ago. You are going to face the judgment of your entire congregation, and you are going to do it completely alone." Across the table, Keisha let out a loud, hysterical wail. She was still staring at the red envelope containing the credit card statements. "Jamal is gone." Keisha sobbed, her body rocking back and forth in the chair. "He packed his bags. He left me. How am I supposed to pay for the townhouse? How am I supposed to live? Maya, you ruined my marriage." I laughed, a cold sound that sliced right through her pity party. "I did not ruin your marriage, Keisha. Your greed ruined your marriage. You treated Jamal like garbage while using my emergency credit cards to fund your fake socialite fantasy. You stole from me to impress a woman who grew up in a trailer park. You deserve to lose everything." The 3 of them continued to weep, a chorus of pathetic, broken people, finally facing the absolute reality of their own malicious actions. They had pushed me to the absolute limit, believing my silence was a sign of weakness. They had no idea they were simply giving me the time I needed to build their guillotine. I checked the sleek silver watch on my wrist. The timing was absolutely perfect. I looked back down at the weeping, trembling figures occupying my dining room. I straightened my posture, projecting the absolute terrifying authority of a woman who had successfully executed a flawless crisis management operation. "Merry Christmas," I announced, my voice cutting through their sobs with icy precision. "You have exactly 10 minutes to vacate my property. Do not pack bags. Do not go upstairs. Take the coats on your backs and walk out the front door." Darius looked up at me, his eyes wide with renewed panic. "Maya, please, it is freezing outside. We have nowhere to go. My bank accounts are frozen." "That is a tragedy you should have considered before you forged my signature," I replied smoothly. 10 minutes, Darius. And I suggest you move quickly. The police were dispatched 15 minutes ago regarding the forged mortgage and the corporate embezzlement." Shirley screamed in terror. Darius scrambled backward on the floor. Keisha froze. In the distance, cutting through the snowy night, the faint, unmistakable wail of police sirens began to echo. Their perfect, arrogant world was entirely crumbling into ash. I picked up my empty glass, walked into the kitchen, and waited for the knocking. Red and blue lights cut through the falling snow, casting violent, strobing reflections across the Italian marble of my kitchen island. The heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door vibrated through the floorboards. I set my empty crystal glass down beside the sink and walked back down the hallway. I opened the door to find 4 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothes detectives standing on my porch. I stepped aside, silently directing them toward the formal dining room where the wreckage of my marriage awaited its final reckoning. The officers moved swiftly, their heavy boots tracking snow onto the expensive Persian rug. Darius did not even try to run. He remained slumped on the floor, weeping uncontrollably as the detectives read him his Miranda rights. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard in a decade. They hauled him to his feet. His $2,000 custom Italian suit was wrinkled, stained with tears, and completely stripped of its fabricated authority. They marched him down the hallway and out the front door. I followed them onto the porch, standing in the freezing winter air, to witness the absolute destruction of their fake empire. Darius was shoved into the back of a squad car right on my manicured front lawn. The flashing police lights illuminated the entire neighborhood. Every single house on the street had its curtains pulled back. The neighbors, the very people Shirley had spent years desperately trying to impress, were watching the golden child of the family being hauled away like a common criminal. Shirley stumbled out of the house behind her son. She had pulled her tailored wool coat entirely over her head, desperately trying to hide her face from the humiliating gaze of the suburban audience. She scurried down the driveway, slipping on the icy pavement, completely abandoned by her precious pastor and stripped of her beloved church elder status. She had absolutely nowhere to go but a cheap motel, her social standing permanently eradicated. Keisha walked out next, clutching nothing but her purse. Jamal had kept his promise and left her destitute. She trudged down the snowy sidewalk without a backward glance, facing a future where she actually had to work to survive. And then there was Chloe. The fake aristocrat was left stranded at the absolute edge of the driveway. She stood shivering violently in her thin silk dress. Her cashmere coat offered zero protection against the harsh winter reality she now faced. She furiously tapped the screen of her phone, frantically trying to summon a luxury rideshare. I watched the exact moment she realized Julian had instantly canceled every single corporate credit card connected to her name. She had $0, no diamond ring, no billionaire fiance, and no stolen equity to fall back on. She looked up at me, her face pale and contorted with freezing desperation. I offered her a single, unbothered smile, turned my back on the pathetic scene, and walked inside, locking the heavy oak door for the final time. 1 year later, the snow fell gently outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my new downtown penthouse. The panoramic view of the city skyline glittered beneath the dark winter sky. I stood in the center of the expansive living room, holding a glass of vintage champagne, surrounded by the vibrant, echoing sounds of genuine laughter and unburdened joy. The air smelled of cinnamon pine and absolute freedom. My life had transformed completely over the past 12 months. The divorce was finalized rapidly. With Darius facing 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud and forgery, his legal counsel folded immediately. I reclaimed every single stolen dollar, sold the suburban house that held so many toxic memories, and relocated to the heart of the city. My crisis management agency had not just survived the personal scandal, it had doubled in size. Corporate boards appreciated a director who demonstrated the ability to ruthlessly execute a cleanup operation, even when the crisis originated in her own dining room. I was no longer just a successful public relations executive. I was a titan in my industry. Tonight, I was hosting a new kind of Christmas party. There were no arrogant mother-in-laws demanding $5,000 catering packages. There were no parasitic sister-in-laws demanding $300 wine. There was no unfaithful husband attempting to assert false dominance. The people filling my penthouse tonight were my chosen family. They were brilliant colleagues who fought beside me in the corporate trenches. They were supportive friends who had watched me carry the crushing weight of a toxic marriage and cheered when I finally dropped it. They were individuals who respected my intellect, valued my time, and never once asked me to shrink myself for their comfort. The private elevator chimed softly, signaling the arrival of a late guest. The door slid open, and Julian stepped into the penthouse. He wore a sharp midnight blue suit, his demeanor relaxed and genuinely warm. The aggressive, terrifying billionaire who had dismantled a dining room a year ago was replaced by a trusted, respected ally. In the aftermath of the embezzlement scandal, Julian and I had collaborated closely to untangle the financial mess Darius had created. Our professional interactions had quickly evolved into a highly lucrative business partnership. My agency now handled the exclusive crisis communications for his entire venture capital portfolio. We had built a formidable alliance based entirely on mutual respect, financial transparency, and a shared intolerance for incompetence. Julian walked over to me, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. He looked out at the glittering skyline, then clinked his crystal glass gently against mine. To a flawless execution, Julian said, a knowing smile playing on his lips. And to an exceedingly profitable year, Maya. To knowing when to cut your losses, I replied, taking a slow, satisfying sip of the expensive wine, and to the incredible peace that follows. Julian nodded, his dark eyes reflecting genuine admiration. He mingled with the other guests, leaving me to stand by the expansive glass windows. I looked out over the city, the twinkling lights stretching for miles in every direction. The contrast between this magnificent reality and the suffocating prison of my past was staggering. For years I had allowed myself to be crushed by the cultural weight of the black tax. I had bought into the insidious expectation that my financial success belonged to my husband's family simply because I had managed to break through the systemic barriers they refused to climb. I had funded their lazy, entitled lifestyles out of a misplaced sense of racial and familial obligation, believing that uplifting them was my duty. I had let Shirley use my hard-earned capital to buy her way into the inner circles of the church, funding her hypocrisy to keep the peace. Worse than the financial drain was the psychological suffocating force of respectability politics. I had muted my own brilliance. I had softened my edges and dimmed my light just so Darius could play the role of the strong black patriarch. I had subjected myself to the relentless, aggressive criticism of a family that valued the appearance of old money over the reality of hard work. I let them weaponize my historically black university education. I let them treat my corporate success as something vulgar, all while they greedily consumed the fruits of my labor. I had allowed my very existence to be policed by frauds. But that version of Maya was dead. She died the moment Darius thought he could forge my signature to buy a diamond for another woman. She died the moment I realized that unconditional loyalty to toxic people is just a prolonged form of financial and emotional suicide. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool, clean air fill my lungs. The power of walking away is the most devastating weapon a woman can wield. When you stop funding their delusions, when you stop accepting their disrespect, their entire world collapses. They rely on your guilt to sustain their false empires. The moment you remove your capital, your energy, and your presence, you expose them to the harsh, unforgiving reality of their own mediocrity. I turned away from the window, looking at the beautiful, successful people filling my home. They were laughing, sharing stories, and lifting each other up. This was what actual respect looked like. This was what a real community felt like. You are the sole architect of your own value. Do not ever let anyone convince you that your success makes them look small. If your light blinds them, they need to cover their eyes or get out of your room. Never apologize for the empire you built with your own hands. Never subsidize the lifestyle of a man who refuses to match your effort. And absolutely never allow a family of parasites to convince you that their presence is a prize you have to purchase. I raised my glass of champagne, offering a silent, triumphant toast to the beautiful, empty winter sky outside. I had burned the parasitic kingdom to the absolute ground, and from those ashes I had built a fortress of absolute peace. The holiday season was finally merry, bright, and completely undeniably mine.